Those who have been to a ruined wedding, what happened? My dad and stepmom's wedding was a shit show. For context, her family was terrible on both sides. Abusive father, neglectful alcoholic mother, and step-parents who didn't care about her much, and she basically ran to my father to get away from it all when she was 15. Bigger problem was, my dad was 26, also abusive, and just a real fucking chicha of a person. On my father's side of things, he hated his mother and blamed everything wrong in his life on her, as he did to most women in his family, later doing it to my stepmom. So the wedding was doomed to be terrible. It started when my stepmom was walking down the aisle. She'd reconnected with her father in the last year and had recently been in a fight with her stepfather, so it was just her dad walking her. There was a branch in the way, outdoor wedding, but he pulled it out, if the way for her. As she thanks him, he lets go and flings it back into her face and literally collapses laughing. She awkwardly chuckles, no doubt knowing he is going to get mad at her if she shows she's upset, and the day continues, but she's visibly upset. After the toasts, some people didn't drink the champagne that had been set out. The one thing she had asked of her mom was that she not drink. She was even given sparkling juice rather than champagne. So while stepmom is changing into her reception dress, her mom goes table to table pounding down all of the alcohol she can get her hands on. A cousin of mine who doesn't know what's happening starts chanting chug, 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 and stepmom walks back to her mom downing the last one and denying everything. Cousin slips out the tent once he realizes what's going on and leaves the two alone to argue. Stepmom comes out crying a few minutes later, goes back to her car, and doesn't come back for a good 20 minutes. While all of that is happening, grandma pulls up and starts cursing out my dad for a ton of shit, including marrying a kid. Stepmom was 25 at this point, who she hates, not letting her invite a friend to the wedding, and him owing her a bunch of money. Dad tells her to fuck off and she leaves. Then my dad got mad at my stepmom for being gone so long, accused her of either being a baby for crying, or of lying and cheating on him. So she sat down on the fringes and tried to not cry, and also remained visible to my dad for the next several hours. They may have been dating for 10 years, but the marriage only lasted 6 months. When I was 17, my aunt got married. She had 8 bridesmaids, only 5 made it to the wedding because they came down with severe food poisoning the night before. So the wedding itself took place on this rooftop garden, but the reception took place in this hotel in the rocks. That should have been a 30-minute car ride away, but somehow nobody remembered it was the middle of the city on a Saturday, so was closer to 50 to 60 minutes. So the reception took place in the ballroom on the 3rd floor, and the stairs were actually incredibly steep, so you had to be super careful coming up and down them. Most women took the approach of taking off their heels if they had to use the stairs. It's important to note that my other aunt, the bride's older sister, is a plus-sized woman and gets drunk very quickly, like blackout drunk. So the party's wrapping up around 2 AM, the happy couple having already left around 11 PM. 2 of the bridesmaids and the only sober groomsmen decide to help my aunt down the stairs because she's so drunk she's barely standing and can't even keep her eyes open. I didn't it happen, but was later told that about halfway down the first set of stairs my aunt just passed out like a light. Everyone goes tumbling. The first bridesmaid somehow stays on the landing, unconscious after hitting her head, but the other 2 keep going. The groomsman breaks his wrist somewhere along the way, and the second bridesmaid knocks out her front teeth, blood everywhere. Because it's the middle of Sydney at 2 AM, it takes the ambulances 35 minutes to get there through the crowds. Despite the fact that we were all adamant about not contacting the happy couple, someone obviously didn't see why they shouldn't call them, and they showed up about 10 minutes after the ambulance. There's a lot of screaming, mostly from my aunt, her new husband finding the whole thing hilarious, which turns her age onto him. Then they have to deal with the manager of the hotel. And honestly, I never spoke to him personally, but I really hated that guy. All he kept saying was, "You can't sue. You signed papers." Apparently the stairs were a safety risk. Who know? They weren't even trying to blame him. My aunt was in full agreement that the whole accident was her sister's fault, but the manager just kept reminding everyone that the hotel was not to blame. I was starting to think maybe it was their fault how much he was going on about it. The last of the guests finally left while the sun was rising. After a few years my aunt started joking that typical the one time she makes a strike, she's not awake to witness it. It's funny now. A few years back, one of my best friends hated her wedding so much that she ended up divorcing her husband not even 2 days later, left in the middle of their honeymoon, moved to a new state to start her life over, dropped out of college, and will not talk to any of us anymore. This has been difficult for me to process because I really miss her and wanted so badly to understand, and everything seemed fine until the day of the wedding. It was the most uncomfortable, unnatural wedding I have ever been to. Nothing inherently bad happened at the wedding, but the vibes were way off. All the guests from her side were extremely cheerful and excited for her, but her husband's side of the family, creepy. Just creepy. Stone cold expressions. Very unwilling to speak with anyone but their side of the family, and disapproving looks towards anyone dancing and having a good time. They just sat there, didn't drink, and then eventually left the outdoor reception early because they could smell weed in the distance. And of course they made a huge fit over it. But I tried to ignore it until my friend, the bride, started giving our other friends and I glances with expressions that clearly were meaning help me and oh god, what am I doing here? Even during the ceremony, I tried multiple times to get her to tell me what was up, but she just kept saying nothing, I'm just sad, and other excuses along those lines. Anyway, fast forward to about 1.5 days later, and I see that she had taken down her marriage status on social media, removed all pictures with her husband in them, and deleted all pictures from the wedding and posts about getting married. Clearly something was wrong, since they should been on their honeymoon. So I called her, and she just tells me that she's divorcing him and starting over, that she hated her wedding, and she realized she didn't love him. Would not give me an explanation. Her husband seemed equally distraught and confused because he was even calling me for answers as to why she was leaving him. That day was the last day I had a conversation with her. By the next day, she had announced her plans to start her life over and move to a new state and find new people and a new career. And she did. She never returned our calls again and eventually deleted all of us from social media. I reached out to her mom and her mom says she's doing great, and I've looked her name up from time to time as well. She really did start her life over completely. New friends and all. We're basically dead to her now. I don't know what the hell happened. She had been dating her husband for almost 5 years before they got married, and they both were amazing people. I know his family was super religious, but neither of them were, and she frequently hung out with his parents despite their clashing religious beliefs. She had even told me numerous times that it has no effect on their relationship and she loved the family. That wedding was the turning point, and all of us felt the discomfort there, but I will never know what really happened. Almost ruined. 35 years ago, my fiancé and I decided we could either pay for a big wedding or use the money on a down payment on a small house with a big yard, and we'd have the wedding there, about 75 people. Bought in January for an August wedding. I lived at the house and spent all non-work time during spring/summer upgrading the landscaping, flowers, lawn, cleaning/painting everything, and upgrading some of the inside etc. while my wife worked tons of extra hours to cover costs. The lawn was new, the yard and house looked great. I then prepared a lot of food in advance, all my/her family favorites. We hired a couple of servers who worked with a good friend to bring out appetizers, then food, then dessert, then more drinks, and keep it organized on the big day. The day before for the wedding we had company put up a large white tent, in case of rain, and chairs with white covers. We decorated with tons of streamers, bells, flowers, table settings, etc. I'm sleeping at the house/she's at her parents' house. Old school. I go to bed about 10:30 to be ready for the wedding the next morning at 9. Around 11 p.m. I'm awakened by thunder rumbling in the distance. Around till the storm is getting near. By 3 a.m. all hell breaks loose. Thunder, lightning, 50 to 60 miles per hour winds. I look out to see the decorations fly, the table settings gone, The chairs look like tumbleweeds. The tent is hopping up / down until the poles drop and it's flailing in the wind. The beautiful iris flowers are all on their sides. I run out in my underwear to pull the tent down and throw rocks on top of it to keep it from being destroyed completely. The storm lets up around 4 AM. From 4 to 6 I pick up and fill a few garbage cans. At 6, I call the tent rental guys. They tell me they'll get there shortly. They pulled out old tent, put up new tent, and provided new chairs. Done by 8:30. I go take a shower, get dressed and greet my friend / servers. They begin setting up / picking up while I go to the church. At 10, the service goes smoothly and we return to the house for the party. My wife notices stuff is different. I tell her I'll explain later. The food's great, lots of drinks, tons of fun. My wife and I opt to leave around 11 PM to head to a hotel. The party continues strong until 4 AM. My best man locks up. On the way to the hotel we share our stories of the day. I tell my wife about the story above. Her experience was different. She slept and didn't even know there was a storm. She couldn't believe I made it through the day with no sleep for 36 hours. She was super thankful for everything I did to make it a great day, so she made the rest of the night extra enjoyable. 35 years later, it's still going. I was in college at a well-known culinary school in Ree. We had, they might still have, a facility in Seekonk, Massachusetts. I was working for the school as a banquet waiter. So, we had a wedding come in. The groom was Irish and the wife was Portuguese. In any other set of circumstances, this would be extraneous information. In this case, there was already tension between the families. Based on what I was overhearing, the wife's family didn't understand why she wasn't marrying a Portuguese guy. The wedding party pretty much proceeded as normal and people seemed to be happy and enjoying themselves. I'm in the dining room checking in with my section partner and the tone of the room changes. Gets kinda hushed. I look around and I see the wife's younger brother getting in the face of the groom on the dance floor right in front of the head table. He's doing the in your face thing and chest bumping. Next thing I know, the groom whacks him. Not a smarten up slap but a closed fist, fully corked punch to the face. The guy goes over the head table and webs out the glass behind it. Not flight, but a hard enough hit to get him onto and rolling over the head table and smacking his head on the glass. The room just erupts with most of them fleeing and maybe 15 or so jumping in. I looked at my partner and said, "Good time for a cig break." As we make our way along the wall from our station to the hallway door, a guy from the party gets in front of me, puts his hand on my chest, and asks where I think I'm going. My friend and partner that night was a kid from New York City, who not only was a 3rd degree BB in Kung Fu, but also taught the police athletic league, where he was from. I swear my friend teleported in front of me and dropped the guy as easy as opening a can of soda. Then, he looks at me, shrugs and says we should get going. We make it to the hall and the matron is booking it to the room and asks us what is going on. Wife's brother got in the face of the groom and the groom knocked the hell out of lil bro. Everyone is fighting or fleeing. Call the police. By the time Seekonk police showed up, everyone was gone except for a couple family gathering gifts and whatnot. Found out later, some of the class act guests had also taken the opportunity to grab some free stuff from the venue like booze and also stole a whole bunch of the gifts for the couple. I'd love to know how that marriage is working out almost 30 years later. I'm pretty sure I know that answer. Edit, unfaking my voice transcription. I wasn't physically there, but heard enough stories to get the idea. My best friend's older sister got married last December, during COVID. They got engaged in August and she immediately decided on a wedding 4 months later. Her family advised her against it, since COVID was due to spike around that time, but she insisted. I've always known her as a controlling Winnie Beach, so I could so see her just throwing a fit about it. They could only do a guest list of 50 people at the time due to COVID, so they got those invites out pretty quickly, but as the family predicted, 4 days before the wedding the venue's capacity went down to 25. Bride insisted the 25 were cut from groom's side instead of her side. Huge fight ensued, but he somehow bowed down to her and let only his parents and siblings be invited. Cue to 2 days before the wedding. Everyone has to prove they tested negative for COVID in order to be in the venue. Groom's mom tests positive, so groom freaks out and tries to postpone the wedding last minute. Bride's mom is an even more controlling bitch than the bride, so the mom stepped in and insisted the wedding goes on. Who cares if the entire wedding is just bride's family? Get over yourself, groom. This is about the bride. Both sides of the family get into huge fights. Groom's family says if he actually goes through with it, he's crazy, and his parents and all 3 of his siblings, including sisters who were bridesmaids, decide they aren't coming anymore. Bride and groom fight leading up to the wedding, since she and her mom still demanded the wedding goes on. Morning of the wedding, the groom is still freaking out trying to cancel, so they were still arguing as she's getting ready. The getting ready photos are on Facebook, and they are so noticeably awkward, and you can just tell there were fights going on. Somehow the wedding goes on, and reception afterwards, where there was obviously no dancing and everyone basically had to be glued to their chairs. I asked my friend about how the reception went, and she just kinda said as good as it could be, but I can just tell she's trying to hide the fact that it was a shit show, since it's her family's fault. There's only one photo total of the reception, and it also just looked so awkward. It's been half a year and I know the professional photos got back, but I haven't seen any posted of the bride and groom together, so I wouldn't BS. So embarrassingly enough, I was dating this girl who asked me to go to her ex's wedding. We dated for a handful months prior, and asking me to go to a wedding together felt like a serious commitment. So I accepted. Planned for the week off work and we went all out for this wedding. Half the time we were trying to enjoy our stay together, she was missing. Fast forward, reception comes up, she makes a scene in the most utterly unstable, mentally sick way in front of children, the groom, the bride, absolutely everyone, and says out loud, "I'm still in love with you. We literally have been faking for the past 2 days, since we've seen each other." She quickly gets escorted out. The bride is clearly upset and everyone goes about their business. But as soon as I leave this woman that I fly 2.5 hours with starts ruining the hall and everything. Getting so upset. On her way out. It was so embarrassing. I figured she was telling the truth, since she was missing the whole time, and I'm pretty sure that everyone during the whole thing assumed this was too crazy to be real. It felt so weird and awkward. I felt a lot of my time was wasted. Felt more frustration than I could imagine. But by the time I left, I was able to leave early. I felt a heavy burden being lifted. Definitely regret not seeing her mentality before, but when you work so much and try to date at the same time, you have very little time to get to know some people. Time sorta flies by and you end up dating for a few months. Fast forward a month or two later, she got together with the groom and I'm pretty sure she has no regrets about wasting my time. She probably doesn't even feel bad about using me or even ruining that man's marriage. This woman is seriously twisted. Edit. Well, sheet. Didn't expect this many comments. Thanks for the award. Concerning the going to an ex's wedding, there weren't any clear signs of dysfunctionality. She was a RN that literally made more money than me and felt like she was just out of my league. She had a lot of patience with me, and being young adults hitting our 30s, it felt like a fairly healthy relationship of 2 adults. So seeing someone who was willing to see their ex's happiness was a sign of a healthy relationship with her peers in my eyes. Obviously I'm not going to defend her actions. And being a mentally unhealthy human being, that I just checked her FB just now, and yes, they are still together, and yes, they look like 2 people who just eloped. Sister's wedding and the chaos that unfolded, in no particular order. She was pregnant, but hadn't made an announcement yet, didn't fit in the dress she bought pre-COVID. Oh yeah, she wore it anyway, outbid the venue with another couple, and footed the bill to the family, because you're supposed to pay for it anyway. Most of the family missed the wedding, because of such short notice, and, well, summer quarantine. Had a falling out with a photographer the night before. Her now former friend didn't show for the event. Mother of the bride collapsed from heat exhaustion setting up that same afternoon. Knocked out 2 front teeth and spent the night in the ER. Ignored doctor's orders and went to the wedding the next day anyway, complete with a now busted lip too. She drank during the ceremony and ended up back in the hospital before night's end due to some reaction from meds at the hospital and the booze. Groom's father spent the weekend trying to one-up the bride's father. Showed up with a new vehicle for the new couple. He later took it back when the bride announced her unplanned pregnancy, because we are Catholic and that's a sin. I later heard the dealership wouldn't take it back because of some damage he caused to it over that same weekend. He went on to blame the groom, who he never gave the keys to in the first place. Oh, he also got into a fight with someone from the neighboring venue. Which brings me to the next thing. Police showed up because the groom's father got into a fight. Groom almost drowned falling drunk into the pool that night. When the newlywed couple announced during the reception they were expecting already, there was an exodus of conservative religious guests. Some even stopped to take their gifts with them. Bride's father made a scene before the ceremony when I showed up and tried to sit with the family. We had a falling out the previous winter and he confidently announced to everyone I wasn't family and should wait outside for the reception to start. The bride insisted her very old, very blind, very sick dog should be a part of the event and wanted him, the dog, by her side while she walked down the aisle. He leaked poo down the aisle during the ceremony. This one is a personal one for me because it was my own wedding. My husband and I got married in church right before we turned 21. At the time we had been dating 2 years and were expecting our first child. The day of the wedding my husband's ride to the venue was his big brother and they were expected 30 minutes before the ceremony. The mass was scheduled to start at 1 and my family and guests were waiting at the church. My future husband was nowhere to be found at that hour and we could not reach him or his family on the phone. About an hour later the guests began to panic and I started to cry because I thought he wouldn't come and got cold feet. I was ready to cancel everything and run home, but around 3:30 he arrived with his family. My father and I were furious about the situation, but everyone told us to start the mass. My father reluctantly walked me down the aisle shaking with rage, not saying a single word. I walked down the aisle holding back tears and feeling my father's shaky hands. The ceremony took all of 25 minutes, and after the mass things got worse. We went over to sign our marriage papers with our witnesses, and as we did this, we heard our guests yelling. We heard someone say he hit her. In Spanish. I immediately tried to run out of the church to check on my mom and family, because when tensions are high, they're usually in the middle of things. My witnesses and husband held me back from going outside because they didn't want me to get involved in any altercation because of the pregnancy. I couldn't see anything that was going on, but I heard a huge commotion and a lot of people yelling at once. I was terrified that something happened to someone, but I could not see anything from where I was. When everything finally calmed down, my mom came in and held me. She said everything was okay, but that my husband's brother had caused a huge scene. Apparently he wanted to bring in live music for the reception, but the church does not have a license for that, so the priest and his wife didn't let the band in. We had told him previously during planning that this wasn't an option, but he brought them anyway. When he was turned away, he struck the priest's wife in the neck. He yelled at her, called her bitch, and tried to punch her, but the rest of his family held him back and took him outside. After this altercation apparently my husband's mother said, okay, we are not wanted here family, we are leaving, and she took everyone from my husband's family home with her. My husband and I had no idea until she was gone. We walked into the half-empty venue and there was no one there for him. Half of the tables and chairs were empty with his family's name cards. My guests said nothing. They didn't know whether to stay or go, or how to even react to everything. They just looked at me and my husband with pity. We seated them and tried to go on with everything, but everyone was still feeling awkward at 7 p.m. and it was just a horrible night overall. In the end, one of my guests gave me the gift of a hotel stay. She knew we were supposed to live with my husband's family and she didn't feel safe with us going home after the ordeal. We ended up staying at the hotel and never going back to live with his family. We were homeless for a short period after the wedding, but we managed to get on our feet before our daughter was born. To this day my husband feels like he was betrayed and abandoned by his family during the wedding, but they've made amends. We still go to the same church and the priest even showed us the security clip weeks later. In the clip you see his brother, 6'3", yelling and lunging at the priest's wife and it's very scary. I'm glad we didn't see it as it was happening, and we were extremely lucky she didn't press charges. It's been 6 years since all of that, and luckily we are still standing. We hope to have a do-over one day, but until then, this is my wedding story. Not as ruinous as other stories and more tangential, but 20 years ago I was in the wedding party for a good buddy's wedding. We were a pretty tight group back then, and all of our sig others had become friends too. One guy had moved away, but came back to be in the party. That guy got really drunk and apparently insulted everyone in the wedding party, including the bride, to the point that she ran out of the reception crying. I knew none of this until we were driving back to the shitty little rural hotel. We were traveling in a couple of vehicles, and that guy was not in our van, and that's when I heard about everything. Even my GF at the time was part of the insult onslaught. I was furious. I was carrying a bottle of water when we walked into the hotel, and I felt someone punch it out of my hand from behind. I turn, and it's him. I lose it, and I grab him by the jacket, drive him backward, and pick him up, slam him against the wall. Totally not like me, and everyone is shocked. We all storm off. Instead of us staying up late and partying, everyone just wants the day to be over. A few minutes later there's a knock on my hotel door. It's him. He's crying. He apologizes and explains that his wife has been cheating on him. I was furious when I opened the door, and now I'm confused as hell. He walked off. I closed the door, and after a few moments, with GF's blessing, I tracked him down, and we ended up staying up all night talking. He's devastated. Of all my friends' wives/GFs, his wife was my favorite. I'm devastated for him. I stood up in their wedding just the summer before. The next morning at breakfast, my friend is public enemy #1. It's not my place to blab his story. I've told my GF, but she's still angry about him. Others are wondering if tempers will flare today, and all I could say is we talked. He apologized and I understand what happened last night. It's all very awkward because I can't condone how he acted at the reception, but I also genuinely hurt for my friend. I couldn't look at my friend's wife at all. Wow, this blew up. I will tell you the story. On a beautiful summer night in 2014, I was to get married out in the middle of nowhere countryside. All my friends, family, and loved ones were there. My ex and I, fiance at the time, had issues. Like big faking issues, and fought all the time. So, being young and dumb, I thought marriage would fix it. Right before the wedding my mom came up to me and asked me, "You sure about this?" And I nodded. It was too late to turn back. The whole ceremony and all that went well. At the end of the night I decided I wanted an after party at the hotel. So my buddies and I moved some of the leftover kegs and liquor to the limo. As we were leaving the wedding location, the limo driver almost hit an animal on the road. Being drunk, I asked him to stop, and I jumped out. There was a 8 to 12-week-old German Shepherd mix looking puppy hiding brush right next to the road. I looked around and saw no one that he could belong to. I sat down and he ran up to me. I made sure he was not injured and brought him to the car. He was scrawny and the highlight of the night. My wife was pissed. She was a cat person. Getting to the hotel, we smuggled the kegs and puppy in. It was literally me pushing a trolley by the front desk with my jacket over the kegs and the puppy in my right arm, so I could hide him from their view. No faking way they didn't see me drunk stumbling around trying to keep this trolley going straight through the lobby with 20 other people and having a puppy barking. Got back to the hotel room. Made sure the puppy was good. Got him water and pulled out a drawer and made him a bed. He passed out, and I named him Thor. The party continued in my in-law's suite. I dared my mother-in-law to do a keg stand, and for my father-in-law to lift her while doing it. He was by no means in shape to do so, but drunk and me thought it would be a great idea. He lifted her up, and she started chugging beer upside down. Then my best man screamed, "Do a push-up while you drink." My mother-in-law decided to do so and fell face first into the keg and knocking her front teeth out. My father-in-law fell backwards and knocked his head on the wall and made a huge dent. Luckily, we are all drunk medics and sobered up rather quickly and started performing sloppy first aid. 5 minutes later there were 4 medics, 4 firefighters, and 3 cops in our hotel room. The hotel had heard the commotion and called 911. Both in-laws were transported to the hospital to get checked out, resulting in expensive dental surgery and a couple nights stay for my father-in-law, since he had a small head bleed. They were not impressed by me and never was again. The next day I took the puppy to see if he was microchipped, which he wasn't. Got him his shots and adopted him. 10 months later I got off work early and I walked in on my wife faking my old golfing buddy. I grabbed my dog and went to the park for a couple hours and then came back to confront my wife. Got half the house price and my dog in the divorce. So I won. Rest in peace Thor. Canine cancer is a faking beach. You were the best friend I could ever ask for. Sorry for the long message. OMG, oh no. Okay, so I get a wedding invitation out of the blue for an old college friend. I go. It's in Texas. Creepy Texas. Like, don't go there if you don't know somebody there Texas. I rent a truck and drive 2 hours from Dallas. I get to the wedding and it's in a community center. Well, this community center is basically a shack attached to a gas station. Behind this gas station is a big metal scrap pile with a big dog on a chain guarding it. So I get there and I find out that the bride's family doesn't want the wedding to happen. Why? Because her in-laws are creepy Christians, think creepy cult-like, and they don't think the family treats her well. They think her in-laws are using her for money and brainwashed her. Okay, so whatever, the wedding happens. During the ceremony the bride's uncle says "fuck this" loudly and walks away from the wedding. Okay, that was uncalled for, but let me tell you I totally agree with him. So the very second that the priest guy dismisses the wedding party and completes the wedding, the groomsmen walk the bridesmaids back down the aisle. When they get there they wait for the groom to get there with him. When he does, all the men take off after said uncle and all 5 of them just fight him. The groom sucker punches him in the back of the head and the other 4 dogpile him. Mind you, this is a tiny, frail old man who got sucker punched. So the bride's family is like "fuck that shit," and then the whole 2 sets of families start literally fighting while the bride is sitting in her truck sobbing. I go talk to the bride. I offer to buy her a plane ticket to leave with me. I offer to drive her around and get away for a bit. Then her husband comes over to me and tells me that his wife and I don't have permission to talk to her. So I get in it with him. I told him I was recording the whole thing and that I have proof that he and his boy sucker punched an old man, and that if he lays a damned finger on me or her, that I will put him face down on the ground in order to keep my friend safe. Then my friend yells at me for defending her. She starts saying really creepy stuff like how he's her husband and she must obey him or she is disobeying God. Safe to say I got the fuck out to Dodge and I cannot abide anything to do with Texas after that. I left, went back to Dallas, had me some phenomenal local Mexican food, saw the JFK Memorial, and then left Texas forever. Oh my god. Let's call me Mary, was invited to my best friend, let's call him Eric's wedding. I had never met the bride-to-be, because he moves fast, and I live far away. Eric picks us, me, my husband and our kid, up at the train station a few days before the wedding, and tells me that his fiancée is a little on her guards with new people, and that it will pass very quickly, and that after that, she is very lovely. She, let's call her the bride, knew me a little, because I was the one she asked many questions about pregnancy, childbirth, and breastfeeding through Facebook, when she had no one to ask, and me being her future husband's best friend, well, I of course accepted to support her when she needed it. Their first kid was born by that point, was about a year old. Having never met the bride in person, when I arrived, I said "Hi, I'm Mary." She went "Well, I know," with a mocking laugh, and then she just left. That same day, we went to the beach with 2 cars because we were many, and I went to Eric's car with the kids, and she was in her own friend's car because you know, they came all the way for the wedding too, and we all wanted to spend time with our own friends upon arrival. And I came from another country 3k kilometers away, hadn't seen him in a very long time. I sensed immediately once we parked that there was a big problem, and it only escalated from there. I was never out of line. My friend and I never had that kind of history. I had to avoid him, avoid looking in his direction, avoid talking to him, but there was only so much I could do to still make it look normal. The bride proper yelled at him on the way from the beach, because we were talking, each pushing our own babies in their strollers. After a few days of that, everybody seeing that she was publicly bullying me, came the wedding. I will pass on all the anecdotes and stuff she said until the wedding, because otherwise we'd be here for a long time. I always kept my tongue, always pretended everything was fine, because it was her faking wedding, and I was a guest, and I can behave. I was also just shocked by her behavior, and couldn't just react. I took it all, no problem. We had discussions with our common friends with Eric. Eric's and I'd common friends. He was never there, not allowed to spend time with us. We were all absolutely shocked. Comes the wedding. She is being an absolute beach the whole day. I was making myself as little as I possibly could. Eric's family came to see me and told me that they saw what was happening and they felt for me and they are on my side. They support me. But everybody is scared shitless of her. Still nice to hear that they see, and I'm not inventing it. She is being horrible. Well, she left her own wedding, drunk, had just got her driving license the day before, and was taking the baby with her. Eric had to fight, verbally, to not let her go drunk with their baby before midnight, and offered to drive them. He never came back to his wedding. No one danced a single second. The whole thing was a shit show, and it was because of my presence. She's batshit crazy, so she'd have found another way to ruin it. She is sick, but the fact remains that my presence was her biggest issue that day/week. And for someone who is so sickly jealous, she was hitting on Eric and I's common friends, one in particular, during the wedding. I have not seen her after that. Eric was forbidden from driving us back to the train station and sent his father. I called him and told him I refused that, so he still brought us back. We had a chat in the car. Few weeks after, she made him block me everywhere, and she's reading his emails. So when I sent emails for his kids or his BD, I never got an answer. Got one a few years ago. That was a one-liner. I did not even bother responding. Sure got the group email a week after the wedding that thanked everyone for their presence during this magical day. It was a very small wedding as well, so I'm suffering from second-hand embarrassment for that line. Everybody saw it was a shit show from start to end. I work in a wedding venue. There have been a few ruined weddings, but one of the worst we just refer to as the vegan wedding. We aren't a vegan venue first and foremost. We can do some vegan options, but it isn't our speciality. Vegan bride and groom wanted the whole wedding to be vegan. The bride's mother was against it and thought they should probably just order vegan food for who was vegan. The bride and groom stuck to their guns and wanted everyone at the wedding to eat vegan. This consisted of a 3-course vegan meal followed by a vegan buffet. The bride and groom weren't happy with our only vegan options and wanted special vegan food that we'd never even heard of. In the end we ended up coming up with a menu they were okay with. The day rolls around and the bride comes in beforehand with decorations and sees that we have milk in the fridge and Bale is behind the bar. She wants these removed immediately because no one on her day is to eat or drink anything but vegan. We refuse this request. After the wedding, all the guests sit down and this is where we find out the only vegan guests are the bride and groom and there are a lot of kids. 15 out of 50 people. We start serving the food and the guests ask what it is. We inform them of what they are eating and some laugh. Some look confused, some eat it in silence, and the kids, all 15 of them, outright refuse to touch it. We have parents of all of the kids complaining, asking if there is anything else they can eat. We have to inform them the bride and groom has only made vegan food available. After the vegan dessert is served, most of the parents have had enough and stand up and leave, mainly because all 15 kids were screaming and crying. There's now about 15-ish people left. The night 2 comes in a couple of hours later, about the same amount as who left. We serve the buffet and are met with the same reaction. A couple of people order pizzas and eat them outside. A couple of people loudly say this is faking ridiculous, what a shit wedding, right next to the bride who at this point is visibly distressed. One man said, what have I done to you to deserve this, while pointing at the buffet, which made a large amount of the people left laugh. Finally the cake is served, a fully vegan chocolate cake which was baked by the man who said, what have I done to deserve this. They cut the cake, which caused half the cake to fall on the floor. The man who baked it said loudly, best place for it in my opinion, to another round of applause and laughter. Bride at this point is practically in tears. We cut up what cake wasn't on the floor and served it. A few people tried it, and most people spat it out. I later tried the cake, and it was like sawdust. The bride kicked out who had ordered in the pizza saying she didn't want anyone to eat non-vegan food. The rest left to go get McDonald's. The bride, groom, and bride's mother and father are the only people left as we inform them we're closing up. Bride's in tears still, and the mother just says I told you it was a bad idea to force people to eat how you want to eat. Was all round just a bad day. Bride and groom would have been a lot happier telling people their intentions and finding a venue that could properly cater what they wanted. The scene is rural Pennsylvania. My sister-in-law's wedding reception. All of your hasty generalizations are right. We were a bunch of hillbillies. We were extremely intoxicated. And we were about to fist fight for several hours straight Jerry Springer style. We were all getting along swimmingly until the group circled around my 17-year-old son offering him a shot of vodka. He made eye contact with me across the room and I slowly shook my head at him. He told them no thank you, to which they protested vehemently. He insisted none for him, and they pushed it in his face. That's when I stepped in. I told them enough. He said no. They all groaned, but that was it. About a half hour later his creepy uncle was congratulating him for making the right choice. Over and over and over. When I saw his hand on my son's leg, I lost my shit a little. I said, he gets it. You're very proud now, that's enough with it. As I removed his hand from my son's leg. Creepy uncle was furious. Called me every name in the book and stormed out. I walked the kids to their camper and went back to the reception. Bad idea. Creepy uncle was there again and spitting mad about the whole ordeal with me. I walked into him getting right in my face yelling about what a terrible mother I am. I stayed cool for a while, but what with the illicit substances coursing through my inhibitions and all, I eventually succumbed to the inevitable Jerry Springer level fight that was about to ensue. He got too close and poked my chest. I can't handle someone poking my chest. I wrapped my leg around his knee and threw him to the floor. That was the first of many violent acts that night. At some point my father-in-law had me pinned to the floor, holding me down like a feral cat. As I whispered in his ear, "Do you feel like a big man now?" He let me up. Also a bad idea. I proceeded to tackle creepy uncle after shoving a box full of mason jars at my despicable mother-in-law, who was protecting him by standing between him and me. I just wanted to distract her, not hurt her. She bawled all the next day about it and claimed I sucker punched her in the face. I'm like, "Beach, if I had punched you, your face would be hamburger. Please." I do vaguely remember telling her that if she ever hurt my kids again, I'd relieve her of her hands though. She used to physically abuse my kids when I was stupid enough to send them to her white trashy house alone. Apparently it all came out in my violent rage that night. I couldn't move for a week afterwards, but successfully made it to work first thing the next morning. I hadn't slept, but I was no longer intoxicated. Just very sore. My sister-in-law was mad until the entire story came out. And still, to this day, no regrets. My brother married a woman on for over 20 a year after she was supposed to be married to his best friend. They reused all the decorations in the venue. A few hours before, my brother told our family friend who was officiating that she wouldn't be doing it because they wanted to know what she was going to say or something like that. They made this big deal about the vows or whatever. Anyway, my family did a lot for the wedding. It wasn't catered, so we had to buy insane amounts of food from a local deli. My mom and I also had our hair done because the bride insisted on hair up, a very particular purple dress and silver heels. There was no rehearsal dinner. We show up an hour before to help set up. They were given money from my parents for a DJ and alcohol. No DJ shows up. Instead her brother plugged in his Spotify. There are 2 bottles of champagne only for the bride and groom. They end up showing up an hour late. Everyone is high. They get out of their cars and smoke is billowing out of it. I'm the only bridesmaid who has their hair done at all. And they're wearing flip-flops. For the ceremony, my mom forced my youngest brother and I to be in this wedding. Neither family was cool with each other or agreed with the wedding. So it's tense. Anyway, they get to the point where they were supposed to say their vows and both of them say they haven't written any. Meanwhile, our family friend who was going to officiate the wedding is sitting in the audience. After my brother kisses the bride, she says, "Well, what do we do now?" To which my brother responds, "I guess we get faked up." They don't even walk down the aisle, just start moving chairs to make room for the dance floor. The bride has her dance with her dad and my brother. Hasn't even said hello to my mother and my brother had to be reminded that he needed to dance with my mom, which the bride cuts in halfway through. Then we have to get pictures and the bride still won't talk to us. She only lets us get a few, then spends an hour with my brother taking pictures with her family. The reception was supposed to go until 11. 2 hours into the reception at about 7 the bride got on the microphone to send everyone home because she's tired. It felt like a pretend wedding. I wasn't surprised when they started talking about divorce a few months later. I'm not even sure they made it to their first year. The wedding was a mess. Would you consider a close family friend nodding at the reception a ruinous event? My cousin was getting married at his mom's property and the place was packed full of family and friends. A great and unique ceremony turned into a pretty epic lakeside party as the sun went down. After an hour or two of flowing drinks and the usual dance floor shenanigans, my cousin asked me where her boyfriend was, a close friend of mine for years, and I realized I hadn't seen him in a while. Keep in mind this friend of mine was an amazing guy, but had a very troubled past and a history of heroin abuse. He has been sober for a couple years at this point. A few minutes later I hear my cousin screaming incoherently from amongst the rows of cars. I ran over, and my dear friend is slumped over lifelessly in his truck, his skin a sickening shade of white and blue, the likes of which I have never seen. I immediately recognized that my dear friend was dying before our eyes and we didn't have much time. I ran back towards the dance floor, knowing my brother was there, a seasoned trauma nurse with a military background, just the kind of a guy you want on your side if you need to save a life or take one. I find him, and we both sprint towards the truck, and I immediately dial 911 as he pulls my dear friend from the truck, and immediately begins CPR/pulse ox monitoring. By this point there is quite a confused and intoxicated crowd gathering around the scene and disrupting a literal life being saved. I put my other brother in charge of clearing everyone out of the area and task one of the only sober relatives I see to drive to the entrance of the property to await EMS, not easily marked, and I knew one wrong turn of the ambulance could mean my friend dies in a field. I stayed on the phone with 911 until the ambulance arrived with Narcan, which is ultimately brought his lifeless body back to us in a fit of confusion and vomit. Needless to say, this event killed every positive vibe surrounding this once joyous occasion and caused quite a bit of drama amongst the family. I was sitting there with a beer in hand at the end of it in utter disbelief, with a range of emotions I have never felt before. So close to losing one of my best friends after coming down from such a high, whilst being so incredibly impressed by my brother's calm demeanor during this life or death situation. If you are ever in a situation where a life is in the balance, please be a part of the solution, finding help, being the help, calling EMS. My brother almost got arrested at his reception. The wedding ceremony went off okay. We get to the hotel and notice 2 Greyhound type private rental buses. No problem until a whole high school band unloads that was in town from Arkansas for a competition. So the geniuses at the hotel put my brother's room on the same floor as the band was on. My brother's wife went to the room to get tennis shoes for the dancing at the reception. She goes down the hall with 20 to 30 high school band members lingering in the hall with their doors open. They start catcalling her and saying things to her like "nice dress, you are in for a hard night," etc. My brother was by the elevator waiting and hears the commotion. He sees her crying and goes hulking down the hallway. There is pushing and shoving. Some people are on the ground. One of the band chaperones hears the melee and breaks it up. My brother is on fire mad. I'm the best man. I hear from one of our high school buddies who is an out-of-state cop that there is a big problem. We get our people in a suite for the wedding party. What happened? My brother gives the blow-by-blow of his version, and he laid hands on a couple of the band members who were mouthy. He also manhandled the chaperone, crumpling up his shirt and slamming him in the wall. I talked to the cop buddy about how screwed are we. Another buddy there is a defense attorney. We are going over our options and a cop walks in. Sheeta along with my dream team of buddies coming talk to the cop and explain the situation. There was catcalling, minor pushing etc and some crumpled clothes and swearing. The cop wants to talk to my brother. He is looking straight on at him and wants to know about the grabbing of the chaperone. My dumbass brother grabs the cop by his shirt and vest and is like, it was like this. Holy fuck. What are you doing? Me and the out-of-state cop jump in and are like, dude, demonstrate on one of us. Not the uniformed officer please. So we discuss the options. I tell my brother you need to apologize to the chaperone so you don't go to jail tonight. The cop was really cool about the whole thing overall. The cop talks to the chaperone and says are we okay with an apology so I don't have to run the groom in on his wedding night. He agrees. They get all the band guys wrangled up and in their rooms. Some of the wedding party smoothed it all over the band members and 20 years later they are still married. In the end it wasn't ruined, but it was a disaster to salvage it. Wife's friend got married in Grand Lake, Colorado, at a bar nestled in a scenic mountain valley. Gorgeous setting. Well, a handful of us arrive on wedding day to set up and find out that the previous wedding from the previous day had not cleaned up at all. Not even a little bit. They were contractual obligated to do so, but did not. Decorations, chairs, tables, basically everything you'd expect to find at a wedding ceremony and reception except the food, all still there. Mom of the bride was frantically calling the park service, but they weren't answering due to weekend hours I guess. So we basically grabbed trash bags and started filling them with all the shit. Wedding in 2 hours and all we needed to do was put up our decorations, and it wouldn't have taken long with the number of people we had, but now we had to take down someone else's wedding and clean everything. Half an hour later, and about 75% of the way done cleaning their sheet up, a Tahoe shows up with the father of the bride and some groomsmen. They're asking us what the fuck we are doing. Mother of our bride gave him one look and said we have a wedding here in an hour and a half. The guy didn't say anything else, and his crew just started gathering up as much as they could and cramming it into the Tahoe, then cleaned whatever was left. They offered to help us set up for the next wedding, but we just wanted them to leave. So, we get all set up, and the wedding is saved. Then the food truck shows up. Then a minute later, the park ranger who had finally gotten the voicemails shows up and tells us we can't have the food truck. The park ranger on duty when the venue was rented approved the food truck, but this park ranger said no. So, no food for the faking reception. We tried hard to keep all of this information from the bride, but somehow she figured it out and was freaking out. The groom looked like he'd aged about 100 years through all of this bullshit. Ultimately we sent the food truck to the camp/cabin site we were all staying at, a couple miles down the road, and reassured the bride that it would actually be better to have the reception there. That way everyone can drink as much as they want and can just retreat to their cabins when they've had enough, rather than trying to clean up or drive back to the campground. In the end it worked out, but holy shit, people suck. Lol mine. TLDR, nothing catastrophic, but just not a single thing went as planned. And my wife's future sister-in-law kinda sucks. At the end of the day we are bummed about it all, but none of the little stuff really matters to us and we are happy. Terrible venue staff that are impossible to communicate with, being notified of their COVID restrictions 2 weeks before turning our guest list from 175 to 50. For the record, not county, city, state, or federal restrictions. The venues. Then we had to cancel the week before. The date was important to us, so we decided to elope then have dinner with some family and bridal party. Family wouldn't allow us to elope, so we had a small ceremony that her parents managed to put together at the last minute. We had our wedding attire altered and everything was good, but just needed some really tiny adjustments. When we went to pick up my suit and her dress, after having them altered, my suit was almost twice as big and her dress was butchered to the point that it looked like she was wearing an inner tube around her waist. From what was told to me, still haven't seen that dress. So she goes with her future sister-in-law/bridesmaid to pick out a new dress for the impromptu ceremony. Her brother offers to get a private room at a restaurant that he had connections with, which we would get at cost. So significantly cheaper than what we had already reserved. Happily accepted to help ease the financial burden with my in-laws insisting on covering everything. So everything is going okay leading up to our makeshift ceremony. Dave, my wife's future sister-in-law, was getting ready with her and driving her to the ceremony. Wife was done 15 minutes late, normal for her, and ready to go, but future in-law wasn't done getting ready, so my wife was 45 minutes late, so future in-law could spend 30 minutes to do lip plumper and touch up her hair. And we were up a mountain with no reception, so no updates were getting to everyone waiting. Started to think she wasn't coming. But she of course makes it, and our impromptu ceremony included crazy and freezing wind while being up a mountain. Her waking down the dirt aisle to a song we both really don't like, and we had a custom piece arranged for her to walk down to, but that was overlooked and wasn't used. But none of it mattered, we're just happy to be married. Here is where the dumb part that we're still dealing with comes in. We head to dinner. We haven't even seen this restaurant or the room we got. We get there, figure out where everything is, and are trying to track down who ended up with our marriage license from the ceremony. There are 5 seats less in the room than what we were told we could have. But all good, we played it safe and under-invited. The room had 2 tables seating 10 each. So family and bridal party sorted themselves into the 2 tables. The last 2 of the bridal part arrived, but the only 2 seats left were at the family table. So we asked my wife's brother and future in-law to move the family table. They were both in the wedding part as well, just so everyone is at a table with people they know. They had already gotten their drinks. They said sure but reluctantly moved. We could tell they were upset by that, and we felt bad. So we went and apologized again. Explained we just tried to put everyone where they could enjoy themselves, and offered to have them over for dinner in a few days too as a thank you. Future sister-in-law proceeds to ignores everyone at dinner including the bride asking for photos. Her brother comes over for dinner a few days later, but she's apparently so mad at us that she doesn't come. Fast forward a few months, she hasn't talked to us, but we keep hearing about how hurt she is. So wife finally meets with her to talk. Despite wife apologizing, again, future in-law continues to tell my wife that it's her job to make sure all of her guests feel important. Then she is demanding that all we go to counseling together because we hurt her and made her feel unimportant. We will not be going. I left out a lot of the other small stuff that went wrong, but it's literally all of it, haha. Thankfully the disaster at my wedding was towards the end, so all the respectable elderly and grandparents had left when shit hit the fan. For the preface, my dad was very upset with me for not having him walk me down the aisle. We have always had a very difficult relationship. My husband and I paid for the wedding ourselves and told him upfront we are independent adults and he wouldn't be walking me down the aisle. My brother stopped talking to me because of this and told me if I didn't let him walk me down the aisle it would be a mistake that would live on forever. One brother came to the wedding and left before the reception. The other brother showed up in my dad's old white suit. BC my dad wanted to prove that even if someone did wear white, no one could look better than his daughter at her wedding. Weird logic but okay. My brother got absolutely hammered and was smoking a dab pen inside right in front of everyone. He is an alcoholic and gets violent when he is drunk, so I'm obviously concerned, but trying to enjoy myself at my wedding. Well, I missed the big show. BC my family did their best to keep me on the dance floor oblivious to the ruckus going on in the back. My brother started a fight outside with the groomsmen, 4 of them. The only one who didn't hit my brother back knew he was my brother. The other 3 just saw some asshole in a white suit hitting their best friend, so they hopped in and put it to a stop by beating the shit out of my brother. His white suit covered in blood. He came inside where some family forced him back out and into an uncle's car. My father took it upon himself to get revenge. He asked 2 of the groomsmen to talk out back. Our best man was on the watch and noticed my dad looked like he was up to something, so he followed and watched my dad pick up a glass water goblet and break it on a table into a shank and then tried to stab our friend in the back. Our best man shoved him to the ground from behind before he could stab our friend. My dad got up and picked up a chair and swung it at the other groomsman, hitting him in the head. One of the men nearby shoved my dad against the wall and asked him if he was crazy. The cops showed up and that's when I realized something bad had happened. They couldn't hide it anymore. My dad came up to me and said your brother was jumped by 6 of your husband's groomsmen. They tore his clothes off him, and he walked home in his underwear. The police are here. What are you going to do about it? With a smirk on his face. Like I was supposed to choose my loyalty at that point? I don't know. But I looked at him and said, why would you tell me this right now? It's my wedding day. And he said justice will be served. My father is a pathological liar, and they put me through hell leading up to my wedding with so much verbal abuse. I knew the story I just heard was skewed somehow, but it was also the first I heard of anything that happened. So I turned my back on him and went to my husband and said we need to leave. I still didn't know the full story at this point, but I knew enough that I just had to get out before I cried in front of all our friends and family. We passed the police on our way to the door. My dad was pointing at the groomsmen saying, there they are. They attacked my son. And my husband yelled, don't believe a word he says. Everything out of his mouth is a lie. Which is true, lol, but not the time to yell that. My father then chased us out spitting, while yelling at us that my husband's friends were trash. My cousins had to hold him back so we could get away. It was horrible. Everything else was wonderful. The ceremony and the reception, the first dance, the cake cutting. Up till the end. I don't talk to my dad or brothers anymore, and my life has been so peaceful ever since. It's okay to cut out toxic people. To anyone reading this far, I didn't know how toxic they were until it affected more than just me. Edit. My dad is also a narcissist, so everything is always about him. At my oldest brother's wedding 2 years before mine, the one who left early, my dad gave a 6-minute speech about how it was his special day too. Where do I start? This is a long read, so enjoy it. Oh, and it's true, love to UN, was not best man, but was partnered with groom's unpredictable sister. She was on prescribed medication once, heard voices and jumped off the roof of their home. Fortunately, a neighbor was watching her the whole time, thinking what the fuck, and when she jumped, it was only one story, so she broke her feet terrible, but kept her from parents keeping her on meds. So I was tasked to take B/W photos of wedding, even though a photographer was hired for the main body of work. So, first, the Church of the Mass had double booked the priest, so the minister to perform was substituted with another, unfamiliar one. The alarm was going off as the substitute didn't have the alarm code. The flowers were late, people were being seated and the church's runner was late, and arrangements put out and they were wrong arrangements. Alarm still going off as most were seated. After alarm off, wedding mass presumed. Afterwards, everyone leaves to head to the reception. About 25 miles away. As one to help, I give some folks directions and wait for the wedding party to finish up. They now need to get on the rental bus and head to the reception, first for photographer, then that evening's event. I'm following the rental bus/limo, not even 2 miles from the church, and a moving truck, coming the other way, gets too close and shears of the limo bus driver's mirror. The driver of the moving truck, U-Haul or Penske been too long to recall, switches places with her husband/boyfriend. The police arrive, and I take a shot. Should post it, but I would need permission, of the wedding couple arguing with the cop. You see, the limo bus cannot operate without that mirror, as the bus limo driver is rigging up something to fix the mirror, to get the bus going, as all are late now. The groom's best man, his brother, is drunk and cursing, mooning, and flipping off the couple that were driving the moving truck. The woman was upset, but she was telling the cop her BF was the driver. No, he wasn't. Isn't that why she is upset, officer? We finally get underway, losing at least what seemed like an hour, when all of a sudden, the bus limo gets pulled over by the same cop that was at the accident. Apparently, the woman was so upset at the best man's colorful metaphors, but not sorry for lying to the officer that she was driving. I was following behind the bus and saw the whole thing, that the cop wanted everyone's name on the bus in case there was any insurance issues. Ahem, fraud, and that the officer was to do this before we left, so covering his ass. Delayed and frustrated and pissed off, the bride is trying to calm the groom down. He is almost yelling at the cop. Oh, it's getting dark now, and I had no flash ready, film, to take anymore, nor wanting to piss the cop off. I walk over as the bus driver gets all back in the bus. We are just off the ramp to the interstate, and I talk to the cop, who is curt with me, and he asks me the wedding party name. I provide it, and he stopped writing on his pad. He steps out of the patrol car, heads over to the bus limo driver's window, and tells him to go on and leave. As I run back to my vehicle, behind the bus, the groom looks at me and says, "What did you say?" I reply, "I told them your last name. Guess your family has some pull." He then smiles and smacks his head like, "Duh. Ever see The Godfather?" Seems the father of the groom and mother are known in the county and school district too well. Hint, Italian family. So the cop gets out and tells the bus limo driver to proceed. We found out a week later that the cop told the tale to his pals at the precinct. The wedding party found no humor in it, and irony, the bride would have that cop's child in her class. Oh, just you wait. So then, party arrives late to the reception. The photographer is upset as he has lost 3 hours of light, but proceeds to round B/G up and get it done. I'm shadowing the sister because she's been known to ruin events and wants center of attention. Turns out, her angry boyfriend shows up. This guy once pulled a knife out on her brother, the groom, in their own house, and they have it out, but take it to the parking lot. Good girl. I go looking for her as we have to dance together, and the boyfriend and her finish fighting, and he whips his little dick out. Wish I had camera, and pees on someone's car. Classy. After returning to the reception, there is a commotion and it's not good. Everyone was worried the groom's sister was going to ruin the wedding, when it turned out, the bride's brother had some mental issue, and trashed at the bathroom, demolishing a stall. I guess I wasn't a good candid photographer as I was lit on champagne and hors d'oeuvres, and not really wanting to stick a lens as a paparazzi into some mentally unstable drunk. Turns out, he had been on medication, but made bad decision to mix several drinks with it. He's not at all that unstable. It was an calculated mistake. Do not take medication and alcohol together. Don't people know you, and others can die from it. So it ended without further drama. The entire groom's family is one big arrested development. As of today, years later, the groom, a pathological liar would be proud of, left his young son alone for several hours while at some horror convention and lied about it. Getting BJ by some horror chick was just the part of the lie he denied, and lost his job for months, never telling the wife. Then, I recall all this because I put the guy up for 3 months and he took advantage of my kindness. I realized 4 years, this groom lied to me, to the spouse, to everyone. That is all he does. Eventually, they divorced and the wife was a saint for putting up with his shit for so long. Who knows where he ended up? Surprise, Florida. And the bride? She's doing well, raised her family well without that pose, and moved on. Maybe it wasn't a complete ruin, but it sure was something I won't forget. Way late to the party, but got her at this wonderful example of redneck glory from June 1998. Bride was one of those keeping up with the Genesis types, saw herself as a real life princess that deserves everything handed to her on silver platter. She's drop dead gorgeous and knows it. If you didn't know her family history, you'd think she was born into old money. But she grew up in a trailer park. Parents are second cousins, but due to rampant infidelity her real father might be her dad's brother, or maybe even her dad's estranged father who is first cousins with groom's mother. She has 7 siblings, and all but one of their paternity is in question as well. Groom's family is much the same, but he only has 5 siblings, all brothers, but the groom is smart as a whip and very business savvy, so he escaped the poverty via education and hard work in finance, and took the bride along for the ride despite her never working a day in her life. The wedding was a $50K affair, the bride's ring was a $20K stunner, and she was already upset because the groom, who was paying for the entire wedding, was being cheap. The rather large guest list included their new life social circle, groom's college social circle, groom's business associates and clients, and both bride and groom parents, which was the end of family members on the guest list. Some 300 guests and only 4 of them family members, and the wedding was an hour drive from the town where they both grew up. A whole 10 minutes into the ceremony, a huge police task force raids the wedding to serve a little over a dozen outstanding arrest warrants of family members. But the big bust was a big bust because the bride and groom intentionally left their extended families off the guest list, but the local and state police had anticipated that extended family being invited and in attendance. Really embarrassing, but ultimately a fairly short interruption all things considered. wedding proceeds and, if not for the wise decision to exclude siblings and extended family, the wedding would have been an unmitigated multi-front disaster. Good thing a large group of trailer trash rednecks, many of whom are career criminals with zero respect for the law, aren't at all offended by the exclusion and will totally honor bride and groom's wishes for them to not be there on Princess's special big day. An hour into the open bar reception, the party had slowly grown in size by nearly 100 people who very much seemed out of place. Dressed in everything from tacky thrift store suits and dresses to camo pants and cut-off sleeveless camo shirts to biker leathers and everything in between. The new arrivals that trickled in were quite loud and obnoxious. This was the crowd the police had been expecting at the wedding, and it was now very obvious to the invited guests why the police had shown up. I suspect the police were first called the moment the best man's unconscious body hit the floor and another groomsman was thrown onto the chocolate fountain, but it took a solid 10 minutes before the first cop showed up, and another 5 before that original task force made an appearance. By then the reception had turned into a Hollywood-style bar brawl, mostly the bride and groom's family fighting each other. By the time the police task force had shown up, most of the invited guests had bailed, as that kind of thing was just not in their wheelhouse. The cops had a hell of a time ending the chaos, but they did get 9 of their targets, one of whom was wanted for murder, though he was later found innocent. All in all, some 25 people were arrested, about 10 of them women, and there has $15k in damages to the building, including broken windows and a small fire. Source was the +1 of a bridesmaid. She ended up with a split lip and had one of the punch bowls dumped on her and the bride. Last I heard, the bride and groom were still happily married at their 20th anniversary a few years ago. They have a single child, a well-adjusted daughter born a couple years after the wedding. Cousin's wedding at an expensive, yet very old hotel. Wedding went fine, but there was a 2-hour window for pictures between the wedding and the reception. We all went up to the reception area. Bride wanted very few tables and chairs to encourage mingling and dancing. Learned after the fact, however, all of the family were in their early 50s and some had serious mobility issues. None of them were looking forward to an entire night of standing, so this was really the first sign, as a whole bunch of 20 and 30-year-olds ended up going to other parts of the hotel to steal chairs for the older wedding guests, and then ended up sitting on the window ledge that ran the length of the hall we were in instead of mingling. The second thing that went wrong was all the food was finger food, and the wedding cake was present with mini cupcakes styled in the same way around it. Some of this food was laid out and it quickly disappeared without being restocked. I guess this wasn't supposed to happen until the reception started. Some of the 20 to 30-year-olds who had been drinking already at the bar ended up eating all the cupcakes. Since the majority of my family was diabetic, we ended up leaving the reception for a local McDonald's and coming back at the designated time for the reception after the pictures. Pictures ended up taking close to 3 hours, but the bridesmaids and groomsmen appeared somewhere in the middle of that 3-hour window. I guess they had been drinking prior to the wedding and had continued to do so. They went to the DJ booth and plugged one of the groomsmen's phones into the aux cable to the speakers, but even with the music only, the groomsmen were dancing together with each other in a circle till eventually after some time the bridesmaids ended up joining them. While the cell phone music was playing, one of the groomsmen who was drunk and mucking grabbed the mic and introduced the newly wedded couple, who came out to applause and to see their wedding party dancing drunk on the floor already, not stopping for their introduction. They then went right into their first dance, but the wedding party would not cede the floor, so they took a small corner of the floor and did their dance, with pictures being taken around the wedding party that was still on the dance floor, drunk and trying to rock out. The bride and groom then went around and mingled a bit before they went to do their cake cutting and pictures, only to find that nearly all the cupcakes had been eaten, ruining the professional display. After that, they cranked up the music and the DJ started to play real songs. We left shortly after. My other cousins told me that, after we and the majority of the other people had left, the hotel brought out sandwiches and a bunch of other food, still all mostly finger food, but that almost all of it went uneaten, because people had either already left, or the ones who stayed were way too drunk to care about eating anymore. It was the worst wedding I have ever been to, and not a single thing went right, on time, in order, or without disruptions. I could not imagine being my cousin and having good memories of the wedding. It was nearly all monopolized by the wedding party. Nothing tragic happened, but back in 2007, Jeddah wedding at a small banquet hall where the bride just straight up had a bad time. The first issue came when the photographer came to me to ask that I announce for the families and wedding party to step outside for pictures. Not typical, as that usually happens before the reception or candidates are taken throughout, but what made things even more awkward was that dinner had just been served. The photographer, bride, and groom got into it with the photographer complaining she was losing daylight if they waited. So eventually half the room emptied while the food got cold. When they returned, they did the father/daughter dance. It was Isn't She Lovely by Stevie Wonder. Extremely common for the father/daughter dance, and I knew to have it queued up to start at 17 seconds. I don't know if I had hit something or it didn't take, but it reverted back to the start of the song when I hit play. Everyone looked at me like I had 3 heads when the sound of a newborn baby crying rang throughout the room for the next 17 seconds. That's totally on me and Stevie Wonder. Later on, the time came for the bouquet toss. I played a drumroll and counted down. The bride threw the bouquet over her head while also dumping the entire glass of red wine she had in her other hand down the front of her dress. She burst into tears and ran through the crowd of women toward the bathroom, most of which followed her, save for the girl who caught the bouquet, who was left standing there awkwardly like, well, this is fun. So the bride came back out in a backup dress after some time to get the dance floor going again and cheer things up. I thought I'd play a crowd pleasing hit that was not on their do not play list. Yeah, by Usher. Can't miss, right? Wrong. The bride burst into tears again. A bridesmaid comes running up to me. Turn it off. Turn it off. Ex-boyfriend song. Ex-boyfriend song. This raised more questions than I wanted answered because 1. She just got married, and 2. How is Yeah by Usher anyone's song with an significant other? Where was the groom during all of this? Drinking in the parking lot with his friends. Again, no tragedies happened, but that wedding sucked. Not what Op asked for, but I had an opposite experience. I have a penchant for ruining family gatherings and have a deeply troubled relationship with most of my relatives for various reasons. Mostly stemming from the fact that I'm politically left and I don't give free passes for people using racist language or joking at queer folks, etc. Anyway, my brother and I have hated each other since birth. We do not talk at all right now and haven't in many years. My mother keeps suffering under the delusion that it's all temporary and someday we'll all be a happy family, although we are in our mid-30s now and it only gets worse every year. Lol. About 6 years ago I got invited to his wedding, and it was a nightmare for everyone, except me. I love weddings. I love drinking. I love dancing. I love meeting new people and getting turned. You could tell my parents and some family members were scrutinizing me like crazy, waiting for me to pop off. I made a promise to myself, before I ever went there, that I would smile the entire time. I would be polite to everyone, and have a great time no matter what. I gave my brother a hug. I've never done that, and never did it since, and he froze with a look of disgust. Did not hug me back. Walked away after. His wife and several of her friends would swing by me a few times during the night, and try to get me to talk shit about him. They'd ask why I was never around, and what went on between us, and I just shrugged and smiled, and said I had no idea what they were on about. As the night went on my mother was bawling in the corner, because my bro is a dick, and ignored her the whole wedding, with my grandmother drying her tears. My brother had seated his whole family in the back corner, and pretended he didn't notice us. He married into money and we aren't rich, so he was embarrassed. By the end, the wife was also bawling and vomiting everywhere. The new in-laws were all real housewife types who only drank water, but seemed to be higher than kites on their scripts. It was hilarious. The bridesmaids were all crying and fighting with each other. Glasses were being thrown. And there I was, all by myself screaming for the DJ to drop the bass. Everyone told me they were shocked I was so well behaved. But fuck that. This was the one time in my life when I wasn't blamed for ruining everything, and they did it all on their own. My sister's was pretty bad. Got a call from my sister's best friend the day before the wedding saying her stepdad had gone into hospital and she was sorry, but she wouldn't make the wedding. She lived a 6-hour drive away, so we lost bridesmaid, page boy and one of the flower girls. Party the night before, so everyone was pretty tired. Groom's stepsister spent most of the night crying because her mother, who had died the year before, couldn't be there, and her poor sister spent most of the night comforting her, on her birthday no less, and she kept everyone else awake. My sister was drunk and my brother took that to get a couple extra people invited to the wedding. Get a call about half an hour before we are due at the church from one of the groomsmen saying they are running late. His partner was with us and refused to say why they were running late. My sister freaked out that the groom was having second thoughts and locked herself in a bedroom crying. My sister's friend still refused to tell us why, so I had to take her outside and tell her that if she didn't tell me then she could leave and she wasn't welcome back, because apparently it didn't matter to her that her supposed good friend was literally crying off all her makeup less than 10 minutes before she's due down the aisle. Turns out the groom's party had left the marriage certificate behind and had to turn around and go get it. Updated my sister, got her cleaned up, makeup redone etc, and finally we get to the church. Most of the groom's side didn't show up, our side was completely full, but his side didn't even have 2 full rows occupied. His sister sat there clutching her mother's photo, which had been given its own seat in memory of her, and crying the whole ceremony. Despite being asked not to move the lovely wedding book I'd bought from its stand, it cost me $60. His family took it outside, got the gorgeous satin cover grass stained, and somehow managed to spill coffee all over it during the photos. After the photos I was running around helping the caterer and photographer. I was busy managing everything, so my sister and parents could relax and enjoy everything. Groom's family beached that I was rude and didn't spend any time with them when I didn't even get to say more than a passing hi to most of my own family. Because so few of his family showed, due to his mother telling his family members not to attend because she didn't approve and claimed she hadn't been involved in it, so she wasn't going to show herself. Spoiler, she'd been asked to help out and she refused to help in any way. I ended up having to do many food parcels for family members just so there wouldn't be any waste. I was the only bridesmaid not thanked in the speeches by either the groom or the bride, despite the fact that I helped pay for the wedding, helped with invitations, catering, venue set up the hen's party as my sister requested. We all lived together, so I was involved in every aspect of the wedding. The rest of the wedding party just turned up for the hen's party and wedding itself, but all of them got mentioned in the speeches, which was pretty devastating to me after all my hard work. At my parents' house afterwards with our family and friends for opening presents, I discovered my brother, who had flown in from another country for the wedding, had gotten high on God knows what with his mates, who weren't supposed to be there, and my brother started getting aggressive, so I took him outside, so he wouldn't spoil things yet again. His mates egged him on as he got angrier, and I ended up having to get some good family friends to remove him from the property because he started to get violent, while his girlfriend cried because she was ashamed of his behavior. I ended up nearly falling asleep at my parents' house because I was running on fumes by 3 PM and left not long after that with my other sister and my adopted 18-year-old son. But at the least my sister never knew the full extent of the drama that went on that day until well after her wedding and honeymoon. Would maybe been all worth it if he hadn't split less than a year later, leaving me to pick up the pieces with my sister as a suddenly single mother to a 2-year-old and pregnant with twins. I worked for a Dove release service for weddings, business openings, birthdays, and religious events. It was a friend's family business. I just helped when they were busy/swamped. So my buddy and I set up 2 cages before a wedding in a private park. His dad comes and fills the cages behind this gazebo surrounded by large purple leaf trees and flower plots. He's there answering questions for a while. We go to get some coffee. So my buddy and I set up 2 cages before a wedding in a private park. His dad comes and fills the cages behind this gazebo surrounded by large purple leaf trees and flower plots. He's there answering questions for a while. We go to get some coffee. Caterers had to call for outdoor chairs as the ones that the wedding party got were only slightly larger than kid-sized chairs and were sinking deep into the soft lawn. Legs were breaking or bending. So we help set the chair up and get rid of the tiny chairs. So we are trying to figure out what happened to the cages when we hear my buddy snort in laughter. It turns out the wedding party members moved the cages to the roof in the gazebo center. You know, I mentioned the purple leaf trees. They have little purple fruits / grape-like, tear-shaped 3/8 inches in clusters. The birds really like the fruits in the cage. They ate a lot of the fruits. There we have red-faced and splatter-covered doves, but the whole platform is covered in splatters. We have all sorts of people in the seats, more filling into seats. So we move away from the party. His mom showed up as the service starts. She's already aware of the cage location. The best part, minister is in the gazebo with the groom and the groomsmen. Music starts startling the birds. What do birds do when they get startled? The groom in an all white, with gold trim tuxedo, his sleeve gets covered by bright red Turks, some in his blonde hair. The podium is now covered in red splatter as well. Groomsman can't keep a straight face. Bride and her dad come out. Her dad is looking angry as she climbs the steps. She takes a spot next to the groom. Music changes. 6 to 10 bright red Turks roll down the bride's veil. Groom and the groomsmen lose it. They shift the positions of everyone in the gazebo. Bride looking mortified. They start with the vows. Everything goes smooth. Except for Turks drop from time to time. They release the doves, who are totally messed up from the fruit. The tops can't open properly due to branches. So they climb out 2 to 3 at a time. A few of them fly down towards the guests. White doves with red faces, splattered bodies. A few people freak out. One guy stomped one. The bride's father went apeshit when we were refused permission to trim the trees or have the gardening staff do it. When we were newly dating, my husband took me as a date to his friend's wedding, and it was such an epic disaster. I didn't know much about the details, so I got dressed to the nines in giant spike heels, a really fancy dress, the works, was definitely trying to impress. Well, we roll up to the venue and it's like the visitor center of a conservation area. Okay. We find his other friends, and they are literally tailgating in the parking lot, taking shots from a Texas Mickey out of the back of our friend's truck. No driving. Don't worry. I realize at this point I'm seriously overdressed. The wedding is set to begin. Do we head into the visitors center? No. We are lead down a dirt road into a gully in the middle of the forest. Apparently they had sent a memo to not wear heels. I did not get the memo. It was July or early August in Ontario, so it was approximately 35 degrees with the humidex, so I'm sweating miles off in this fancy dress, and my hair decides it's had enough and goes rogue into a giant sweaty puffball. The ceremony begins, and I'm literally leaning up against a tree. The officiant is completely drowned out by the sound of not so distant dirt bikes. After the ceremony we all head back to the visitor center for dinner. There is one bathroom, complete with composting toilet, so we are all jockeying to get in, to pee and fix ourselves up. It's very quickly destroyed. We go up to the bar, to get some pre-dinner drinks. We were told it was a twoony bar, so none of us brought much money. I only brought $20. It was not a twoony bar and drinks were minimum $5. Boo. Dinner starts, and the MC directs us to the envelopes at each table. Says everyone needs to donate some money for the bride and groom, and the tables that give the most get to eat first. My sad table of misfits looks at each other, and we all realize we have no money. I've already spent a quarter of mine on one drink. We all give in some change, maybe a $5. One enterprising misfit throws in a handful of M&Ms. Our table is therefore last to eat. By this point I'm several drinks in, and haven't eaten anything. It's not looking too good for me. I get sloppy. Finally, after the worst ever dinner and the world's longest speeches, it's time to dance. I'm pretty drunk at this point and make a pretty decent out of myself on the dancer floor in front of the very conservative family. At 10 o'clock the music cuts off and the party's over. Time for bed. Oh, did I mention we were all staying over at the visitors center? They had a bunch of rooms with bunk beds. Yeah. Anyways, it's still pretty early for a bunch of early 20s misfits, so we and our friends all go to one of the rooms, where we are just chilling. talking, and passing around a bottle of tequila someone smuggled in. Nothing crazy, and we are trying to be quiet and respectful. Around 11 p.m., the mother of the bride storms into the room we're in, yanks the bottle of tequila out of my friend's hand, and starts screaming at all of us that the wedding is over, and it's time to go to bed. We are a little like what the fuck, and it's still not super late, so we decide that maybe we should just go outside to keep hanging out, because surely outside we won't be bothering anyone. We don't even have any alcohol at this point, and I did not need more anyways. So we head outside, at which point the mother of the bride calls security on us. The groom comes out and tell us that the bride and her mother are pissed and that it's time for bed. The security guard is sympathetic, but gently lectures us a bit and then brings us all back in. So we all begrudgingly head back to our rooms for the night. We crawl into our bunk beds and fall asleep. The next morning at like 8 a.m. we are awoken to the groom angrily knocking and sticking his head into the room and telling us to get up because it's time for us to help clean up and then GTFO. There is a breakfast buffet, so my Sil grabs a muffin, at which point the bride yells at her that the food is only for the wedding party and that we'd better start cleaning up right now. We did a couple of chores, then were basically told to leave immediately or else they would have to pay extra for us being there or something. I dunno. At that point we could not leave fast enough. Us and our other friends met up at a truck stop to grab some breakfast for the 3-hour drive home, and we were all just like, what the fuck was that? The best part is now almost 12 years later the groom has never spoken to any of us again. We think it's because the bride and her mom were so appalled at our after hours drinking and fun having revelry at a wedding of all places. So basically, we ruined their wedding. That wedding will live in infamy amongst our friend group, and as the worst wedding any of us have ever been to. My husband and I can look back at all this and sort of laugh now, but a lot of people would consider even a fraction of what happened on our wedding day ruining material. Buckle up. Leading up to the big day my psycho mother uninvited herself to the wedding after throwing a giant temper tantrum on Mother's Day. There was already a history of strain between us, but wedding stress ended up being the final nails in the coffin and I haven't talked to her in years since this all happened. She was primarily upset because we bought my mother-in-law a $100 dress and some shoes, since she literally had nothing even semi-formal to wear. Social security living in pretty extreme poverty my husband's entire life, and we thought it'd be nice to coordinate her dress colors to my husband's suit for the mother-son dance/pictures. While my mother picked out her own dress, which was the most formal thing anyone would have worn aside from me, the bride was way too close to being white for comfort and was $500 plus. Definitely not anything we could afford, even if she weren't significantly more well off than us at the time. Then my mother wanted to control who was in what pictures, and didn't like that I wanted one with all the mothers specifically. She was offended it'd be including my stepmom. I tried to compromise and told her she could have her own pictures without stepmom too, but that wasn't good enough. I'll add that my stepmom was the only one helping me with any planning, helped pay for way more than my dad even initially agreed to, and handmade all our decorations. Mommy dearest offered help with exactly zero of these things, or anything else for that matter. After all this she was also pissed she wasn't included in the catering planning/taste testing, but my dad is the picky eater, and with how she'd been behaving no way did I want those two in the same space more than absolutely necessary. Plus dad paid for catering. When she finally had her meltdown these were just the big ones, but there was a lot of little petty things and other personal attacks thrown in too. The last phone call we ever had ended in me yelling happy faking Mother's Day and hanging up on her. Never looked back. Unfortunately because she's so petty, she made sure several family members on her side no-showed, even after us fing. So we had more food and seating than necessary, but oh well. Moving on to my father-in-law, who is basically the male version of my mother just not fed with a silver spoon and chocked full of toxic masculinity for good measure. Literally everyone in his life thinks he's an asshole, and over the years I've come to learn all too well why that is. A few months before the wedding he started a slander campaign against me because he knows I'm not his #1 fan and I don't put up with his literal abuse of my husband and his wife/ex-wife/girlfriend. IDK what to call their weird relationship, but my in-laws divorced when my husband was very young, got back together and never remarried. He'd frequently get belligerently drunk, pick fights with all of us, and expect everyone to kisses, as while he proceeded to fall on it rinse lather repeat, until I finally had enough, and decided to stay multiple arms lengths away from that mess. I won't get into more details, because we'd be here forever, but basically we were not on speaking terms, and the only reason father-in-law wasn't completely out of the picture was for the sake of mother-in-law. Fast forward to our wedding day, and my husband invited father-in-law to run a quick errand with him, during which he simply asked father-in-law to give me space for the day. It didn't go over well, and father-in-law completely went off saying he didn't even want to come to the wedding in the first place, among many other colorful things he had to say about me. When my husband didn't budge, and basically told him that his reaction was exactly why I didn't want to deal with him, his dad literally started opening the car door and got out while my husband was driving out of the parking lot of the venue. It was a scene. Mother-in-law and uncle were also in the parking lot witnessing all this, and were in shock as father-in-law stormed to his truck demanding they follow, because they were all leaving. My husband told him he wasn't going to stop him from leaving, but that his mother and uncle were staying. After father-in-law spewed a bunch of bullshit to them about how I said he had to sit in the back for the wedding, couldn't touch anything, and couldn't talk to anyone. Nobody said any of that. They also came to the conclusion he was full of shit, and he drove off without them. This stranded them 2 to 3 hours from home in the middle of nowhere. After that fiasco, mother-in-law decided to take an undetermined amount of Xanax, wash it down with whatever she could get from the bar, and finish off with a couple of joints. About an hour before the ceremony, she walked up to my husband apologizing for missing it, so yeah, she was probably as far gone as father-in-law at that point. Right after the ceremony, mother-in-law decided to change out of the dress we got her, and into some worn-out leggings and a tank top, bright red bra hanging out like a sore thumb, clunky brown falling apart sandals. It was bad. My husband had to remind her they had a dance to do, and told her to please change back into her dress, because people would be taking pictures. She pouted but went and changed back. When she came back out, the back of her dress was unzipped and wide open all the way to her waistline, fire engine red bra out for everyone to see. My husband was mortified as my sister came up discreetly as possible and zipped it up for her in the middle of the dance floor. My poor husband looks miserable in every photo with his mother, especially since during these photos she tried to pick a booger out of my stepmom's nose without warning twice. So yeah, those are most of the highlights. TLDR, I guess my wedding was kind of a clusterfuck lol. OG's edited to at, I got so carried away with all the parental drama I forgot to mention one of the guests also went into anaphylactic shock in the middle of our first dance, and their EpiPen didn't work, so they ended up spending the rest of the night in the ER. They had a severe nut allergy, and despite me telling the caterers multiple times in advance not to use any, and double checking while everyone was lining up for the buffet that they hadn't, the nuts they insisted weren't used were definitely in something. The family member hasn't seemed to like me very much ever since. Nothing was actually ruined, but it totally could have been. I'm Irish Canadian, Catholic, and my husband is Indian, Muslim. We had a traditional Indian wedding. No vows, speeches, first dances, etc. It was great for me because I'm anxious AF, and it was easy for me to just sit on the stage and take pictures with everyone, and most of all I didn't have to say anything lol. But before the wedding, one of my cracked out cousins receives her invite and sees a blessing in Arabic on it. Proceeds to text me saying my husband will beat and abuse me because he's Muslim. Okay, I invite her. Then she's mad I uninvite her. Her and her mother, my aunt, don't show up. While we were taking pictures pre-reception, we get a call from the imam saying we can't get married. I wrote agnostic on my wedding form instead of Catholic. My Phil saw this, thought it was fine, gave it to the imam to keep for 1 week, and only right before the wedding did he go over the form. So I basically had to convert on the spot to get married or call off the whole thing. I was so pissed. I told everyone I wasn't converting and to send the guests home. My husband's whole family started crying, so I relented and did a pseudo conversion to get on with the wedding. I invited my narcissistic mother, who I'd previously been no contact with. My family insisted I invite her. She shows up to this traditional Muslim wedding in a bright strapless blue dress, like she's at the Met Gala. She gets mad that she's not involved in things during the wedding, i.e. family walking in and being introduced, family being on the stage during marriage/signing. It was only my dad and brother. She really struggled with not having attention on her, so she went around introducing herself to everyone as the mother of the bride so they knew. Fortunately all these things were low-key and not obvious to anyone but me and close family. We had a huge variety of people at the wedding. Bosnian, Finnish, Colombian, Polish, Hungarian. They all got trashed in the parking lot because it was a dry wedding. Even though my husband's side is conservative, they ended up loosening up and dancing with everyone else. Even though it seemed like they were polar opposites, everyone got along really well. Other funny cultural things. I'm in the bridal suite with my husband, best friend, and brother. My MIL comes in and meets my brother for the first time. He extends his hand to says it's nice to meet you. Muslim women aren't supposed to shake hands, and it gets so awkward. BC she's just ignoring his hand, but he keeps it out, and we just all start laughing. And I swear to God, leading up to my wedding, every single phone call I had with my dad he asked no shaking the ladies' hands, right? I would have assumed he told my brother this by now. My grandmother wanted a picture with my Phil. Men also aren't supposed to touch women who aren't their wife or related to her, but my grandma doesn't know this, and she plants a big ol' smooch on his cheek for the picture. Hilarious. My own. Where to start? My mom did all the wedding planning and arrangements for my ex and I to get married in Las Vegas. Hotel reservations, chapel booked, mail and hair apps, reception, dinner reservation, flowers, cake, etc. We handled our clothes, travel and paid for hotel for ourselves. His family refused to attend because it was Memorial Day weekend and they had plans for a family BBQ instead. So our entire guest list was 6. 2 of which were my stepsibs, who were 5 and 3 at the time. During the wedding planning, my stepsib's mother, my stepdad's ex-wife, screamed on the phone and said that she would charge him with kidnapping if he took the kids out of state for the wedding, unless he paid her an extra $1,500 in support. We get to Vegas and the hotel refuses to let us check in because we are both under 25. I have to call my mom to come down from her room to switch the room reservation to her name and give her cash to repay her. When we go to the county clerk to get our license, she initially refused to issue it because my ex's legal birth name is technically a nickname. Think Nixon on his BC instead of Nicholas Sidney, not his real name, but you get the idea. Finally, we got that, but it makes me 5 minutes late for my hair and nail apt. Get to the salon, they claim there's no apt, and it's a 2-hour wait for service. I step outside to call my mom for help, since she made the apt and my purse got stolen with all my ID and travel money in it. My dad went dumpster diving in his USMC dress uniform and didn't find it. While doing my own hair and makeup, I cut my hand open on my borrowed piece of jewelry for the ceremony. Still have the scar on my palm. Got to the chapel, and they had lost the info on my prepaid wedding, so I didn't get the upgrades we had paid for, like roses in my bouquet. The photographer that was part of the package was drunk as a skunk and only spoke German, so all my wedding photos are me in tears, while I'm being screamed commands in German, how to be posed. Of 3 rolls of film, I only got 1 photo of the whole thing that came out halfway decent. My mom told everyone the wrong time for the ceremony, so what few guests we had showed up 45 minutes late, including my parents who were standing up with us and our witnesses. The chapel was threatening to cancel our ceremony and make us rebook as my family came running up late. My uncle showed up in wrinkled chinos and shirt with dirty old tennis on and refused to take his sunglasses off the whole time, even for photos. My stepsibs fought through the whole ceremony, including kicking each other and screaming in the chapel. The vows, which I had specifically told the chaplain were not to include the words love, honor and obey for both of us, were still give to us as love, honor and obey. I got dirty looks from the chaplain when I said love, honor and cherish, but W/E. My reception dinner restaurant lost the reservation. Are we seeing a trend here? And apologized by hyping my stepsibs up with free soda until they were vibrating. The wedding cake that was supposed to arrive after dinner didn't. The restaurant kitchen swore they didn't receive the delivery. Calls to the baker were met with, "I delivered it to the kitchen myself. What do you want from me?" We went back to my parents' hotel room to chat and get a call that my cake has been located. The baker had delivered it to the hotel's room service kitchen instead of the restaurant kitchen. They sent my cake up, but refused us any silver or plates unless we wanted to pay $10 a head for their use. My cake, which was supposed to be a small 2-tier round wedding cake, was a half-sheet cake that looked exactly like a grocery store bakery birthday cake. I cut my wedding cake with the handle of a plastic fork, which my mom had luckily packed disposable tabla in case the hotel refused to provide any. My ex shoved cake in my face and up my nose despite our agreement not to do any cake shoving during the first bite. In the process, he pulled one of my earrings out of my ear and nearly tore my earlobe. I ended locked in the bathroom with my mom and aunt while they iced my ear and helped me get frosting out of my ears, nose, and eyelashes. Meanwhile, my ex was this close to getting his ass beat in the other room by my stepdad and uncle, while my stepsibs were jumping on the bed and trying to shove cake down their gullets before anyone stopped them. In all this, we forgot to ice the bottle of champagne that my mom had bought, so my toast was with warm champagne. My uncle threw a fit because I wasn't 21 yet, and I told him after the day we'd had, if I wanted a sip of champagne on my wedding day, that was my business. He sulked for the rest of the night. My hotel room for the wedding night was across the hall from my parents, so after the reception, we retreated over there to change and relax. The AC was broken in the on position, so it's May in Las Vegas and it's 62 degrees in our hotel room. They can't send anyone up because there's no maintenance staff available to look at it. We end up putting on pajamas and huddling under the blanket to stay warm while we watch Star Trek. Meanwhile, we can hear my aunt dying laughing in the hall over our D&D sign on the door because we had clearly started the honeymoon fast. My uncle beached because we were doing that with my stepsibs and parents across the hall. My stepsibs are so sugar high that I'm pretty sure at least one of them discovered a new dimension, and my mom started beating on my door telling me she is going to make me have the kids sleep in my room for the night so I can get first-hand experience at what parenthood is like. Luckily, my stepdad talked her off that ledge. The next day, we went to change hotels and once again, prepaid reservation lost. That was the only thing that worked in my favor, because upon hearing that, the day manager upgraded us to a suite, got us tickets to the concert in their theater. Sadly, we were too young to attend, so she unlocked the CCTV of the concert to our room for free and booked us a cabana at the pool. But yeah, disaster start to finish. I think it was the universe trying to warn me off of marrying him. When I was 19, I attended my friend's wedding as a bridesmaid. I didn't have high hopes. The couple were only together for 6 months and my friend, who was the bride, was the one who proposed. But don't get me wrong, I supported her decision. I knew she was in love, but I never really liked her fiancé because he seemed sketchy and only showed affection to my friend if he was bored or if he felt lonely. It was a pretty big wedding. Everything was perfect. A lot of guests, about 100 plus, singers, a big feast, etc. We were all ready. I really liked my dress too. But it was still a long time till the actual wedding would start, since the location in a beachside where the hotel was near and the bride wasn't done and was still doing her makeup and hair. Since I was the first bridesmaid to be done, I decided to check the place, and it was amazing. I helped with the organizers to place some of the chairs, and then the groom arrived. I asked him if he was excited and to not fuck this up in a joke way. He promised me he'll do his best. I left after that to see how the bride was doing, since it's going to start in about 30-40 minutes. Just then another one of the bridesmaids that I never really know came out to check the place too. I checked in on my friend and helped her a little. She had a photo shoot and she asked me, "Can you call the groom?" not saying his name, since he wasn't there. I checked outside again, but he wasn't there. I asked few of the guests where he was and told me they all said they didn't know. They arrived there without seeing him in front. I thought it was weird, but tried to find him myself. Couldn't find him at all. I even asked the hotel receptionist. Nothing. I told the news to my friend and said it's okay. He might have went to the bathroom and decided to go to the wedding. The groom was late. He was the only one not there. All the bridesmaids, guests, the pastor, even the ring bearer and flower girls were present. Everyone, except him. We started getting worried. I still remember I could see the tears forming on my friend's eyes. And there, faking hallelujah, he arrived. The only problem was his hair was a little ruffled, the buttons on his clothes weren't even aligned, his tie was loose, but most importantly his cheeks were red. You'd think he was just nervous and blushing, but no. He has a pale face, and the only places where he had pinkish red parts were in particular places. But the bride didn't mind. I think me and the other bridesmaids were the only ones that took it in and thought it was really sus. Here we go. The wedding was done. We were at the reception. Everyone was eating, kids were playing, and the singers were having a fun time too. The food was great too. There were some people who left early, and one of them were the bridesmaids. Then, after like 8 minutes after that one bridesmaid left, the groom said he'll go to the bathroom. He hasn't returned in 5 minutes. 10, 15. The bride had enough and asked us to search for him along with her because the dance between the couple was going to start. We searched for him and guess what? Is it obvious yet? We went into the boys' bathroom and there he was, making out with a bridesmaid, literally almost naked, both of them. My friend went furious and started crying. Groom was trying to explain. The bridesmaid was at the back. The girl tried to escape the scene, but me, being a furious friend, grabbed her by the hair and started pulling it. The others started joining too and beat her up. The bride kept slapping and punching the groom out of anger. Eventually she had enough, went to the reception and started screaming everywhere. She wrecked everything, the food, the tables, everything. Everyone left, even us, and let her do her thing. We explained the situation to everyone, and the parents of the bride went furious. Found the groom, beat him up. Everyone left. The bride wanted to be let alone, even if we stayed there, to try and comfort her. Up to this day, it was still so vivid and everything was juicy and faked up. Been 7 years now. My friend is now lesbian because she doesn't and never wants to be with a guy ever again. Worked this wedding with the caterer, not as a guest. Tangents in the story below tie into the evening's events. Reception hall is filling, food is hot. Waiting on more guests and the wedding party to arrive. A lot of well-intentioned help running around, causing confusion. We grew up together. This is important for her. More of us showed up than you set up tables for. Can you still feed us all? I'll let them know we were still under the booking total. This is mildly annoying, as questions are always worded as mistakes to be corrected. I reassure all we have capacity to seat/feed them. Wedding party arrives. We start putting food out. Mother of the bride looks at me with concern. Asks if I can take her to the chef. Her first question is whether the breaded chicken is gluten-free. Well, gluten is an ingredient in the standard cooking oil. Everything will have it. Chef immediately stops, gets his order form, clearly marked with date, capacity, menu, and checklist of allergies. Nothing is listed. She's frozen this whole time, tries to compose herself as she says, "No, no, no. I didn't order gluten-free, but the groom's family, parents, aunts/uncles etc. entire extended family present, are gluten intolerant. I had no idea. What can you do?" Well, it's 7:30 p.m. The only other consistent question I've gotten is, when can we eat? They're hungry. She walks out, and the chef and I both say the same thing out of exasperation. Let's marry them tomorrow night. The groom's family can only have salad. Energy in the room is down, as his family found out they can't eat. Everyone who has asked me a question about food quantity is now giving me a dark look. One of the oversharing/flirtatious bridesmaids, Katie, told me earlier, after a bunch of menu questions I was able to handle for her, about a bad breakup she's getting over. Said there aren't too many guys here she likes, and that I should find her later, when it's time to dance. Strong crazy vibe feels, not to mention totally inappropriate. Hard pass. Katie is back now, asks me if we can talk somewhere private. I nod at the bartender. He trails behind, so I have a witness. She starts ripping me personally for the issue, just name calling. tells me I'm just like her ex etc. She works up to heartless, genocidal crowd starving, lying, fucking inbred sociopath. Points for creativity. No, nowhere near the US South. If you're wondering, then get the idea that we refund the cost for everything and purchase them food from elsewhere at our expense immediately, or she'll sue. Well, there won't be a refund when 90% of the people can eat, and the mistake wasn't ours, but I don't tell her that. She demands all this of me, and I'll let her vent. Thanked her for sharing her concerns. As she began winding down, I came back to the chef calling his friend who owns a restaurant nearby for 23 individual gluten-free meals, trying to salvage this for them. The mother of the bride is more than happy to pay for it, very appreciative that we may have a solution. While this arrives, after everyone else is having seconds, the energy does return to normal. At the end of the night, Katie approaches me again, slips me her number, and forces a hug on me as I stand there like a statue, hands crossed behind my back, kisses my cheek, promises me she isn't drinking, breath confirms, says she wasn't very nice earlier, that I should call her, and she'll make it up to me. Bartender confirms he didn't serve her. Can only imagine what kind of roller coaster that would been. The mother of the bride came and thanked us afterwards, in tears, which is what's really important here. So, I guess this is a ruined, JK not quite, story. I usually enjoy the parties, so it did kind of ruin things for me. For the next few months I was looking over my shoulder, expecting her to show up randomly, as she'd mentioned, being 10 minutes away. Moral of the story is, check with the bride and groom's immediate family, and see what food allergies they have before ordering. I don't mean to brag, but I think it's a pretty good idea. I don't know if the bride felt the wedding was ruined, but I know by the end of it us bridesmaids were over it big time. Good friend came home from another country for her wedding. Everything had been set up from overseas. We've got a lovely apartment to stay in nearby all locations for the wedding day. We were up by 5 AM to get ready for the wedding ceremony at 10 AM. That's when we discover the bride's bra is missing. So once hair and makeup are done I go into town to track down a bra that will work with her dress. On a Sunday morning when everything is closed, I get back and find the flowers haven't been delivered as promised, so I then duck out to grab flowers for the wedding party. The cars show up, lovely gorgeous vintage cars, and the bride insists on photos. Clock is ticking. We start getting calls from the church asking where we are. We finally get to the church a full hour late. The ceremony itself goes really well, and it's time for photos at a local garden before dinner at the top of the gardens. So we are an hour behind schedule at this point, but it's okay, because it should only take us 2 hours to do photos from the bottom of the gardens to the top. I'm starving because it's heading on 2 PM and I haven't eaten yet because I was out running errands for the bride when breakfast was served, and being late to the ceremony meant no lunch. Around 4ish the restaurant starts calling us asking where we are. All the guests have arrived at the reception and they want to know how much longer we are going to be taking photos for. We are not even halfway through the gardens. By 7 PM the restaurant is calling us to say they are serving the food because the guests are getting restless. The maid of honor had been pushing the bride along for several hours trying to get her to get moving so we can get some damn food. By this point she's given up, just literally said to me I'm done. Your turn. The other 2 bridesmaids haven't said a word about how long this is taking. By 9 freaking PM we finally make it to the restaurant. And still the bride delays by getting the photographer to take more photos. I'm not kidding here. 6+ hours of stopping to take photos. My stomach is literally growling by this point. We finally make it through the doors and I just about cried with relief at getting some food. Only to find it's pretty much all gone. There's like 2 potatoes left, a small amount of lamb, and a couple of scattered vegetables, some melted ice cream, deflated pavlova and a bit of fruit that definitely isn't looking its best. Maybe enough for one person to have a plateful, and there's 6 of us who haven't eaten yet. The restaurant didn't hold any food back for the bridal party. Kitchen is closed, and all that's left is the wedding cake. I actually went into the bathroom and cried at that point. It had been more than 24 hours since I'd last eaten, and I was exhausted. The maid of honor and I ended up at friend's birthday party about 11 p.m. and dived into the food. When we got there, because we were starving, open tap bar and all we cared about was getting some damn food. This happened a good 15 years ago, and that day still stands out to me in terms of hardest wedding I was a bridesmaid at. Another one, we woke up on the day of the wedding to find out a hailstorm had literally destroyed crops of flowers, and we had no flowers at all for the wedding as no one had any that weren't damaged, and has us scrambling calling every florist for any flower that was still in okay condition. At least the bride was happy. Not necessarily ruined, but was a terrible planned wedding that annoyed the guests. Back in 2015 I was a +1 with a now ex-friend and we traveled to Waco, Texas. My friend had went to college or something with the bride, but had said that she hated the groom because he cheated on the bride, but she is forcing marriage out of codependent issues. Nice. Flew into Dallas, rented a car, and stayed in super sketchy motel in Waco, Garros. The morning of we drove out to farmlands, and when I saw the crops I thought, where are we? We pulled up to this trailer / small hall, and when I got out I saw there was maybe a small lake nearby. When we walked in, the bride and groom were getting dressed in front of each other with the groomsmen and bridesmaids. I was like, oh, did we walk in by mistake? The bride goes, hey, come on in. People were running around in street clothes, boxers, and the such. She hugged her friend, but the groom nor his friends never said hi. So we walk outside and there was a small setup under a metal patio. My guess was it was a mobile hall made to do weddings. There was a few people there so we congregated. Someone walked out and said, okay everyone, the wedding is about again, please walk down yard to the water down there. As we were walking, I saw a little awning with some flowers, but as I got closer to the water I realized there were cows in it, and they were starting to exit to the property across the fence. The water was brown, and the bank was muddy. We were literally in somebody's farm property. We and the rest of the guests walked up and saw metal brown chairs, the kind you see in high school assemblies, just randomly placed next to the awning. We all started to sit down but then shot right back up because the seats were super hot from the Texas heat. I could hear a few girls starting to get pissed because of the short dresses. Some just decided to stand. Asses burnt. The ceremony begins. The bride and the gang starts to come down. Kind of random themes and music. Then the groom comes down with his friends and they are all wearing stormtrooper masks. Mind you, I'm down for a Star Wars wedding but nothing else with Star Wars themed, so it seemed a little out of place. Some people looked back and giggled, but most people thought, okay. So when the groom came up the ceremony began, and while the pastor was talking, they laughed the entire time. When it came time to pull the rings out, the bride and groom were laughing so much that I think they almost dropped the rings or something. The vows were a joke. I don't remember in detail, but the grooms went something like, yeah, I think you're cool, haha, I'd like to marry you, haha. By then, people in the audience stopped laughing and started to whisper to each other asking what is going on. So once they did the smoochy face, someone from the family announced, okay everyone, time to walk back to the patio and grab yourself some food. So we all walked back and there was some Ktober with some Budweiser being served. The first dance came up, and the bride began to dancing with her father, which was the most awkward dance I've ever seen. There was no emotion between the two. They didn't look at each other, didn't say anything, just seems like they were like, okay, let's just get this done. And then while they were dancing, someone else came up and started dancing to near the end of the song. I said to my ex-friend, what the hell is going on? She said, I have no idea. This is a mess. I could see the faces of the other guests and they were so lost. Everything else about the reception was awkward as balls. The speeches from the groom's friends were about him the entire time. Didn't mention much about the bride, but said something like, good luck you two. Love and cheat. Anyways, after all the things were said and done, the groom and his friends never came to thank us for coming or introduce themselves in any way. Not that I care personally, but if someone traveled half the country to your wedding, it would be at least courteous to acknowledge them and thank them for coming. So it was time to go, and that was that. The trip wasn't an entire bus, because I got to see my cousin who I had never met. She's awesome. But I'll never forget how shitty this wedding was. TLDR, shitty planned wedding in Waco, Texas. in the middle of farmland and some mobile trainer haul. No consistency. Bride and groom getting dressed in front of each other, and friends and guests. Burnt asses from metal chairs next to a poop brown lake with a muddy bank with tons of cows swimming. Star Wars masks on groom and his friends. October food and awkward reception. Groom was a cheater and bride codependent. So, once the wedding actually started, it went okay, but everything leading up to it was a disaster. First, the bride asked my husband to be a groomsman, because the groom doesn't have many friends. My husband was like, sure, but I can't commit to any time other than the wedding weekend, because of my terrible job. Bride said okay. Next thing we knew, he's being asked to go to multiple suit fittings in apparently the only suitable suit shop, which is like a 2-hour drive for us. He said no, and was demoted to usher, which he was fine with. Next, I went for one session of dress shopping with the bride and her mother, where her mother basically told her it was sinful to stand up before God in a strapless dress. I'm a Christian myself, but I struggled with not saying pretty sure God's seen boobs before. Bride was upset both at that, at the lack of options in her size, and at her own weight. Don't blame her there. The David's bridal had mirrors everywhere, so it's a tough place if you don't like how you look. The bride also picked out ugly floor-length bridesmaid dresses that looked like mother of the bride dresses. She also seemed to not want to pick a color, so in addition to the purple dresses, there were orange and green accessories. One of my best friends was a bridesmaid, and she wasn't happy about wearing all this stuff. Next, the rehearsal. I was playing piano for this shindig, so I managed to escape most of the drama, but my place in the church balcony allowed an excellent view of the proceedings. The bride's father, a pastor, was officiating, so he was taking everyone through the ceremony, but he kept getting distracted because the bride's nephew, who was supposed to be a ring bearer, wandered aimlessly throughout the sanctuary causing a lot of noise. No effort was made to restrain or remove the child. The bride's mother occasionally sat him down next to her, but allowed him to continue to roam freely as he desired, so the explanation of the ceremony was interrupted every 2 minutes by the bride's father saying, "Nathan, stop that. Nathan, don't do that." This made the whole situation take way longer than necessary, and we couldn't eat dinner until it was over, so people started to get cranky. The bride also was upset that there were more bridesmaids than groomsmen, and made a snarky comment to my husband about his refusal to get fitted for the suit. Finally, the wedding. The bride's brother, a groomsman and Nathan's father, arrived nearly an hour late to the ceremony. Nathan, it transpired, refused to be put into a suit, so he was not going to be the ring bearer. Don't know why they expected a 2-year-old to be able to focus for that long anyway, especially after his behavior at the rehearsal. But, finally, the ceremony started, and everything went smoothly from there. They're still married, though I sometimes think, uncharitably, that the bride just wanted any dude, so she wouldn't be lonely, since the groom is probably the most awkward and spassy human I've ever met, and having a conversation with him is like pulling teeth. Okay, so my wedding, which we both never wanted to have in the first place. My so just wanted to go to the courthouse and have a big honeymoon, then save the remainder of the money for our new life together. Her father however insisted on walking her down the aisle. The day of the wedding I got a call from my mom saying that the venue was booked for the wrong day and that there was an elderly trash pickup going on. While we were freaking out, she called back and said a city council woman was there and the venue was in her district. She moved some stuff around so we could pull off the wedding, but we had to share the outside with a photo shoot later that evening. We got to the venue and my dad told us that the BBQ was messed up, so he had to order food. Then I saw who was helping my parents set up. The one family friend I explicitly said to no invite because she is crazy. I went outside to clear my head. My grandpa walked up to me and said he had a run-in with the elderly group as they were leaving. They were pissed they had to leave and told him to fuck off, and thanks for faking up my morning. I then got a call from a close friend who was coming saying that his roommate, who was not invited, ditched him and was coming to our wedding without him. He was only an hour plane ride away, so I got him a ticket. I then had to call the friends she was staying with to make sure she didn't show up or she would be asked to leave. The reason I didn't want her to come is because me and my so had a falling out with her a couple of months ago because she is batshit crazy. The first guest to arrive was my very conservative grandmother who was toting around a large garbage bag. My father came up to me later and informed me that all 6 of her firearms were in the bag because she saw a sign saying, "Take your valuables with you in the parking lot." During the ceremony the minister slipped in religious jargon after we explicitly told him not to. We are not religious even in the slightest. We plan to renew our vows at a later date to at least rectify this part. After the ceremony, that family friend I didn't want to invite approached us and asked us if we were swingers. This 40-year-old blob of a hillbilly human had the goal to pick us up on our wedding day. Right after she said that, her husband approached us and said, "Hey, thanks for the dinner and the show. There's a girl with her bussy out in the garden." That's right folks. The photo shoot was a completely nude shoot. At the end of it all I really can't believe all this shit happened in a couple of hours. TLDR, wedding date was wrong. Old people cussed out my grandpa. My grandma brought her guns. Jesus came to the party. My mom's friends were DTF. And there was a nude photo shoot. Your wedding is never about you. It's about the people who attend. Also don't have a wedding. This is India, Lucknow, hot summer day. 300 people gathered in an open lawn, and at 7ish PM, when the bride showed up people gathered and were celebrating and feasting. The venue was a good 2 miles from the hotel, and when I got there we went straight to the dessert stand. It was in a lush green lawn, and with music and open tents with lighting. Uttar Pradesh with its 200-meter people and a state where it matters how one marries to maybe differentiate between classes, and this was definitely a rich affair. While having a nice chocolate sundae, I heard a noise. It was thunder in the background. It was louder than the loud music and the clouds seemed to be moving in our direction. In less than half an hour it started to drizzle. There was a sense of tension in everyone's eye, especially the organizers who had probably spent a good $100K that evening. The lighting company started frantically covering up their wiring and sparks were emitting from some of the focus lights. The tent fabric was now wet and now the beams started to make some god-awful noises. And while this was going, guests covering their bright dresses and bleeding McHugh right now towards shelter or their cars. As people started to leave, my friend who was getting married, mostly drenched in sweat and rain, tried to keep guests from leaving, but in vain. I was drenched, but made a dash to the dessert counter for that third scoop of ice cream before all that food for 300 people would have been packed up. Then the unthinkable happened. Well, not unthinkable, as the tent was holding hundreds of liters of water, finally gave way and collapsed, hitting a man who probably didn't break a bone, but was definitely bleeding. We left the venue to get a cab, and with mud on our shoes, got to the hotel. After reaching the designated party room, we cracked open a beer and waited while other guests got back. One token gift for the lucky couple got wet, and electronics and water don't get along, so we joked over that. Finally our friend came by our room. Since then I had made a few trips to the lobby helping his very troubled dad to arrange for food for the guests at their rooms and make sure others guests got cabs. For obvious reasons the night ended without the after party. This was an arranged marriage, where the couple aren't in love, but their families meet up and set them up. In this setting people care more about caste, money made, and how the girl looks. Fast forward 4 days later, at my friend's place he mentioned that after they eventually got married and went for their honeymoon for a week. Well, confused I said, but it's been 4 days. He was like his wife and him had a fight. She accused him of trying to kiss her. She never liked him. Married for money. I didn't say much, gave him a beer and later updated his Tinder for him. He is too shy to actually say much. He is a sweet guy. Lem know if one of you ladies is single. My husband's cousin's wedding. TLDR. Long drive to a cow pasture. No beverages of any kind. No food for 5+ HRS. No toilets. 96 DGF feet outside. Not enough shade. And a 2+ HOUR bizarre ceremony with 3+ HRS of photos following. Before the food poisoning reception. We had our own issues with flights trying to get across the country to Florida in July, the night before, so we were already stressed. Had a decent night at the hotel, and a decent morning. Still tired, but hey, that's life traveling. We meet up with my husband's parents to carpool to the wedding. 2 hours of Jimmy Buffett on the radio and off-roading in a rental sedan later, we arrive at a picnic site in the middle of cow pastures with a small pavilion and at least 200 people milling about. It stinks of manure. There's barely any shade. It's already 85 at 11 am. There's one portable toilet. We figure, screw it, we'll stay for the ceremony and appetizers and dips it. We wait about an hour for the couple to arrive. Everyone is ushered to the cheap foldable chairs in the sun, and the ceremony begins. There's a lengthy sermon. Then there's original poetry readings by family. Then there's original religious singing performances. Then there's a 45 minutes foot cleansing ceremony by the couple, including taking off and reapplying not tied sneakers and socks, all while the couple takes moments to make out. Fine, if you want to do the Jesus cleaning feet thing, but wear flip-flops and restrain your urges, FFS. The ceremony finally ends, 2 hours later, and the couple goes off to take photos. Everyone is dying of heat and thirst by this point. We line up at the pavilion, where we are expecting refreshments at the very least. Popsicles. Not even real fruit frozen on a stick, but those sheety sugar water-filled plastic tubes. That's it. No water, no food, no booze, barely any shade, and it's easily over 95 3 hours later, the DJ announces the reception. There's 10 to 12 picnic tables and 250 plus people here. People start claiming seating space in the shade. Then the DJ says we're doing a welcome for the couple. Everyone back out into the sun. The wedding party does the normal dance into the floor loop, but then the couple does this sex-fueled dance entry, and it lasts well over 10 minutes. The DJ then says that other couples should come out and join them. No takers, but he tries for another 10 minutes or so. We left during this. We found out later that other family members brought their own snacks, water, and booze, because they guessed correctly that she'd pull this kind of sheet. She was marrying an uber religious Nigerian guy, and they do weddings differently than what we're used to. I have nothing against other cultures, it just would have been nice to know. Other things we found out later. The professional catering company only brought food for 50 people. That's what they were told to bring. They did not bring any beverages of any kind except for their staff. Because so much time had passed, the food was deemed unsafe at the holding temperature, and they left without serving anything. The rest of the food was provided by the groom's church. All of it was some type of meat/fish stew that had been sitting in unheated crock pots, or rice that was in flimsy aluminum chafing dishes, since who knows when. At the latest, 9 am that morning, since they showed up at 10 am. Even if there would have been enough for the guests, I'm sure it would not have been safe to eat. People were openly relieving themselves behind cars, because the line for the single toilet was so long. 5 people were treated for heat stroke after some church members left and brought back water. Just water. God heals all. The bride's family and friends all left after finding out the food situation. They had been optimistically waiting for 8+ hours for some relief and finally just left. I'm convinced they would have been very ill if they stayed. The festivities went well after sunset. Some guests had trouble leaving after dark because the trail of a road wasn't marked, and most people drove sedans in. Several tow trucks were called. The remaining guests had to clean up everything because the property rental people strictly enforced taking out every single bit of trash before they left. I still don't know if this included excrement. I imagine they have this rule because it's surrounded by cow pasture and the owners don't want their cattle eating trash.